one is available to take your call. Please leave a message after the tone.
Sorry, I can't make it today, chaps. In the spirit of Christmas and whatnot, I have to go and make amends with an old acquaintance. All the best. I'm sure you'll have an absolute blast without me, slowing things down with my nonsense. Or will you? But anyway, I hope everyone enjoys their holiday, Christmas, whatever. And I shall see you all in the new year. Bye!
Bah humbug, now that's too strong cause it is my favorite holiday, but all this year's been a busy blur. Don't think I have the energy to add to my already mad rush just cause it's tis the season. The perfect gift for me would be the fSobriety end of year list-a-thon. Ho ho ho, bitches.
Ho ho ho, and welcome to fSobriety, and here to deliver the biggest Christmas surprise since the one Phoebe Cates received that time in Gremlins. Hi, I'm Craig Woods.
And decking the halls with boughs of holly and our usual brand of verbal nonsense, I'm James Hamilton.
And James, curiously, it seems to be just the two of us, as the song goes.
Just the two of us.
Yeah, Alan has got other business to take care of.
Yeah, I don't know what that is. Some secret Christmas mission a la John McClane. John McClane, the star of Die Hard, not the early 20th century Scottish socialist of the same name.
Although, it's more likely that he would be like the latter rather than the former.
Yeah, I'd take full responsibility for that.
Or maybe he's living some sort of It's a Wonderful Life alternate reality right now. Who knows?
You know what, knowing Alan, that seems very probable.
Either way, Alan, we wish you a Merry Christmas.
Yeah, get in touch again. Let us know what you're up to. Hope you're having a sweet time. We'll be thinking of you, to paraphrase Gordon Cole, while I sip this fine Baileys.
And we'll try and track him down again before January happens.
Yeah, that would be handy. So James, what are we here for? And I don't mean that in a big philosophical existential way. I mean, what are we literally here to record?
Craig, it's the most wonderful time of the year.
Sure
we
is.
are here to deliver our now traditional, I guess, to makes a tradition,
I think
our
that's how
now
it works,
traditional end of year fSobriety Christmas feast.
Woo!
Where we will be, much like every other publication, podcast, website, news service, and reviewers, running down our top 10s of things.
And every irritating guy you know on social media, rhyming off their lists of favourite things from the year. Congrats if you love that shit. You've come to the right
You're
place.
in for a treat, yeah. So, unlike those other fuckers though, Craig, our arbitrary lists of top 10 things covers the entire spectrum of popular culture, so I'm not saying that ours is better, I'm just saying it's definitely longer and it's better.
We take the word feast and we really make it true. Alright, so
But yeah, so listeners, if you're regular listeners, thanks for joining us once again. This is, like I say, this is going to be a little different. It's going to be a little loosier, goosier, if you can imagine that, than our normal episodes. If this is your first time listening and you've just been looking for an end-of-year podcast, welcome!
Yeah, thank you for choosing us. We surely appreciate it. I think regular listeners, if you have tuned into this, which I hope a fair few of you have done, it's probably because for some reason you enjoy some of the chat we come out with. That's greatly appreciated. We're happy to spend Christmas with you virtually for at least, well, however long this episode lasts. Last year was an epic. We'll see how this one goes. But why rush Christmas? But yeah, thanks very much for that. And I have to say, specifically, a very special welcome to our listeners in Latin America, because it's crazy how many we have.
No, do you know what? I'm not even going to attempt to butcher the Spanish language by saying Feliz Navidad. You can
Feliz
do it.
Navidad. Mis mejores deseos para nuestros oyentes en América Latina. Gracias por todo su apoyo. Los queremos a todos. Amor y solidaridad para el nuevo año. We appreciate you all.
Now do it in Portuguese for our Brazilian listeners.
Alright, I'm not that good.
Merry Christmas, Brazil.
Obrigado, Brazil.
And wherever you are around the world, if you're celebrating Christmas, have a great one. Settle in, grab yourself a beverage or 7, sit by a roaring fire, unless you're in Los Angeles
Yeah,
or
or Australia, where it is literally the height of summer.
Yeah, sit by the air conditioner. And join us as we absolutely rinse The Wizard by Paul Hardcastle in this series of countdowns of our top 10s.
Paul Hardcastle, congrats. There's a big YouTube copyright claim coming your way.
Craig, my friend,
James.
What are we going to begin with today?
Well, I think given that most of our podcast time is dedicated to discussing things we have watched on the telly box, as we call it over here, I think we should begin with TV shows. Nobody calls it that.
Well, in that case, Craig, that sounds very much to me like this is an episode of
fSobriety TV. Cue the music.
Hello and welcome to yet another episode of fSobriety TV, the podcast in which we do the thing that we talk about when it's television.
Yes, nicely phrased.
Thanks. This is why you usually do the introductions.
Right, yeah. And so this time around, we're rounding up our favourite TV shows of 2021, top 10s. So here's what I think we'll do. We'll just alternate as we count down.
Why don't you begin, Craig, and let us know what your number 10 TV show of 2021 is?
So my number 10, when I weighed it all up, James, I was pretty confident this was always going to make it to my top 10. It was just a question of where. And it juggled around. It kind of swapped places a few times with certain things. But I eventually came down on number 10 because, and this is probably going to give it away to you as soon as I say this, it was a show that ultimately, when it came to the end of it, I was like, I don't know that that 100% worked as a show, but it brought me so much joy to watch. And that show is Netflix modern classic brand new cherry flavour, which I know is a show you were very keen on.
I felt like it was one of those TV shows that was designed specifically for me.
Yeah, and I think I advertised it that way to you at the time.
Yeah. It was set in the 90s. It used a lot of David Lynch motifs. There was some David Cronenberg-esque body horror in there. I'm not sure how it did in terms of actual ratings.
That's a good question. I honestly don't know. It got a very polarised response online, I can tell you that. There was nobody in the middle about this show, I don't think. I mean, even though I'm uneven in my response about how it all works at the end, there's no doubt I don't have any qualms about saying it was 100% enjoyable to watch. But there's a lot of people, I think, found it difficult, which is fair. I think it's fine.
It's understandable. It starts off as one thing and rapidly becomes another.
Rapidly becomes 10 more.
Yeah. It's a spiral, and as we discussed on the show previously, it is based on a book, and the TV show is the first 60-odd pages of a 300-page novel. So I feel like they could have gone crazier with it, but they kind of reworked it to sort of maybe work as a season 1. I don't know if they're going to make a season 2. I don't think it needs a season 2.
Yeah, I mean, it was advertised as a limited series, and I think it was commissioned that way. Just for the benefit of anybody who's not listened to us talk about this previously and is not really sure what this show is, in broad strokes, it's about a young woman in the early 90s, played brilliantly by Rosa Salazar, who is a young filmmaker who is looking to adapt her short film into a feature, and she kind of gets involved with this very sleazy producer who essentially steals the film out from under her. That's simplifying quite a bit, but that's basically what happens. And she thereafter gets involved in, shall we just straight up call this Catherine Keener character a witch of some kind? Is that fair to say?
I think that's fair to say, yes.
Yeah, who makes a deal with Rosa Salazar's character, saying that she can sort all of these things out for her and get revenge on this guy. And hilarity doth ensue.
It absolutely does. I spent at least 50% of this show crying with laughter, maybe 25% of the show just in sheer shock at what I was seeing, and the other 25 thoroughly enjoying myself. It was one of my favourite things of the year. Rosa Salazar's performance is absolutely incredible.
She's great, and she has to do so much far out stuff in this role as well that I think for an actor can be difficult. Like, I think as an actor to get yourself in the right headspace where you're in such a madcap world is a challenge for a start. But I think this is actually one of the criticisms I saw from some people about this show, is they just felt the tone was so wildly inconsistent, which they're not wrong about. But I think for me, one of the things that did tie it together was Rosa Salazar's performance, which I thought she was always 100% believable no matter what she's doing in this show. And she does do some pretty outlandish things in the process of this show.
Hashtag Phil Cool facial expressions.
I remember saying that to you. It's the second episode where she's completely out her tits, just high as fuck throughout the entire episode. And you know, we've all seen great performances of actors pretending to be high, but this is one of the best I'd ever seen. I found it so believable, and there's so many really quite unflattering close-ups of Rosa Salazar's face in a state of just complete bewilderment and intoxication. I was like, this is actually supreme acting. That is really great.
It's hard to be unflattering to Rosa Salazar as well, because she's a very beautiful woman.
True, but she does pull some faces in that one episode alone that is just like, wow, that is wild.
I think I mentioned this when we were talking about it before, but I remember, I think the only thing I'd seen her in fact I hadn't even seen it, I'd only seen clips of it, was the film Alita Battle Angel.
That's literally the only thing I know her from, other than that animated show that I'm forgetting the title of, in which she stars with Bob Odenkirk.
But it looked like there's obviously a lot of animation and like CGI done to her body in Alita Battle Angel, and I thought that they had made her eyes a lot bigger, like to make her look more like a sort of anime character, until I saw a brand new cherry flavour, and I was like, that's just what she looks like.
Yeah. I mean, away from all of the outlandishness, if we can, for us, which is difficult to do with this show, I mean, it is like 90% outlandishness, there is thematically some really interesting stuff going on about, first of all, obviously it's come along just in the wake of, in the last couple of years, the Me Too movement, and Harvey Weinstein and everything else, and it does feel very current because of that, despite having been set in the early 90s. But of course, these things have been going on since the dawn of Hollywood, you know, so and it's very much tapping into that, and the whole idea, it still seems fresh, really, that we get to see female characters be vengeful to this extent. It still feels like a novelty, which it shouldn't. It should be something we're used to seeing by now, because there's nothing illegitimate about that as a story. I mean, I think just about every woman out there has some kind of fantasy revenge story in their head. Consider a lot of the shit that women go through, and obviously it's something we hear a lot more about now. It's something we're talking about a lot more and being made to talk about, thankfully. Even though it's an age-old thing, it feels fresh just because we're still in that area at the moment. Yep. So there's a lot of interesting stuff with that going on. There's also like some really great, for people who don't normally like this kind of thing, don't run to the hills when I say this, because the show's treatment of this is so crazy. But there is a lot of philosophical stuff in it about the old. It does do. You mentioned the Cronenberg thing. It does do that whole like the kind of schism between the mind and the body. There's a lot of that going on. There's a lot of that existential stuff going on that's really clever, but it's portrayed in such a grand guignol kind of way. First of all, subtlety is not in this show's vocabulary. I should make that very clear.
Yeah, it is not for the faint-hearted.
Yeah, it's very in your face in every conceivable way. So, yeah, even if you're not particularly concerned about subtext, there's plenty to enjoy in this show. I feel like there's plenty to enjoy for people who come to shows for various different reasons, can find different things to enjoy in this show. I think it's just a question of how satisfying you find that it all comes together in the end. That's maybe the challenge.
Mm-hmm. I think listeners to this podcast are probably the sort of cross-section that would enjoy it.
Yeah, I think that's fair, yeah.
So if you haven't seen it, it's on Netflix. Go check it out.
It is. It's on Netflix, and it's well worth watching. Is it 8 episodes?
It is an 8-episode limited series, in fact, yes.
Yeah, there you go. And it's beautifully shot, it's beautifully made. That's something we should say about it. I mean, it looks fantastic. The cinematography is so lush. Production design is really nice. It has got that in spades. I mean, it just oozes quality on the screen. It oozes plenty of bodily fluids also.
It also oozes kittens.
So that's my number 10. James, what about yourself?
My number 10, Craig, is an animated show that I mentioned briefly in a few episodes ago. It's made it into my top 10 despite being like a quarter way through its run at the moment, or like a third of the way through its run at the moment, and that is Young Justice Phantoms. I've mentioned it before, I'll just briefly talk about it again. This is a show that is way more well written, way better executed, way smarter, way more current, way more, dare I say, woke than any show of this type has to be. It is a mature but fun. It's everything you want out of a DC TV show, but it's one that it's like a family DC TV show. So it's like everything you want out of a TV show that the kids can watch. I'm not saying the kids can't watch Harley Quinn or Doom Patrol, but you know what I mean. It's incredibly well written. I don't want to say anything about the new series because it's hard to say anything about it without spoiling it. But it begins on Mars with a murder mystery. There's a major character death in the first 4 episodes, and then a lot of the next few episodes are the fallout and people dealing with said death, while another threat from the previous season starts to rear its head, and it's so good, man. It's so good. The voice acting in it's brilliant. It looks beautiful. It's so well animated. Great music. It's just, I can't say enough good things about Young Justice in general, and specifically Young Justice Season 4, subheading Phantoms.
If you like your comic books and your heroes getting about it.
Yep. Craig, number
James.
9 for you.
Number 9. Okay, my number 9 in my top 10 TV. I've gone with a show I've become very fond of in the last couple of years. It's a Canadian anthology show called Slasher.
Uh-huh.
And I have talked about this on the podcast before. For anybody unfamiliar, every season is a new story that's basically an 8-episode slasher movie. And I have to say, this is its 4th season this year. And every season, and I don't know how they keep doing it, but somehow every season seems to get crazier. The first season of this I really loved a lot, and I actually was rewatching it with Alan, wherever he is. Where are you, Alan? Alan's sometimes a bit squeamish about certain forms of violence. Some things he can sit through with no problem. With something like you can have a really ghastly scene of someone being decapitated and Alan just won't bat an eyelid, but then you'll have something first of all, he does have that phobia about stigmata, so anytime anybody's got a wound in their hand, Alan just almost faints. And then it's just the odd thing, like there was an episode of The Americans we watched recently where somebody just had a protracted death scene after being stabbed in the neck, and he really freaked out about that. But then he'll happily watch limbs being sliced off and things like that. So when we started watching Slasher, I was like, I wonder if Alan's going to be okay with this, but he was fine with it for the most part, I think. So whatever that is, whatever that tells you, I can tell you the violence in Slasher is extremely graphic. Sometimes it looks utterly ridiculous and comic booky. Sometimes it looks just about real enough that, okay, that is pretty horrendous. One of the things I love about the show is each of the seasons has had a really solid storyline, and this is something that the Slasher movie does not necessarily need to do. But it helps if you're creating an 8-episode long drama that you build characters that are kind of interesting to spend time with. And it's got an established pattern now of each season there's something. It's a bit of the I know what you did last summer type thing, where in each of these seasons there is something that has happened in the past that then comes back to haunt the characters.
Right. Nice.
That's a recurring motif in every single season. So it gets to play around with time quite a bit, which does keep the story a lot more interesting. The first season, I remember when it came on, I think was in 2016, and it was one of those things I just was looking for randomly something to, pass the time. Pass the inertia, and it ended up being way better than I expected. And I remember the reason I'm bringing this up is because we watched it with Alan. I was like watching the first season again. I was like, you know what, this is actually quite tame compared to what I remember it. But it's because every season since has just amped up every aspect of the slasher until the last 2 seasons specifically have just been utterly insane.
I mean, I guess in that respect, it follows the sort of trajectory of the slasher movie, where
That's
every
true.
installment has to get more and more crazy with the levels of violence and stuff. Yeah.
That's true, yeah. But the storylines are all solid, the characters are always really fun. It's also a very funny show, and not just funny in the way that you normally laugh at a slasher movie at times. It's very witty, the writing is really witty, and it's got some recurring cast in it. And some of that kind of repertory company of actors are all really solid, and it's really cool getting to familiarise yourself with a group of actors and then getting to see them do different things each season. There's an actress in it actually who I will admit I've become extremely fond of. She's great. Her name's Paula Brancati. And I was looking her up, and apparently she was a big star in Canada after having starred in Degrassi: The Next Generation.
That fucking show just spawns superstars, man.
She is amazing in Slasher, and every single season she plays an incredible character that's entirely different each time. The third season actually had my favourite one because she plays an absolute psychopath in that one. Season 4 this year, she plays a much more sedate and much more quote unquote normal character, which I was initially a bit disappointed by. I was like, come on, Paula, do something mental. But this season, basically the storyline is it involves a family reunion, this very wealthy family, where the grand patriarch of the family, played by David Cronenberg, no less, calls the family to this remote island where he announces he's close to death and he's about to bequeath everything to one person in the family. However, it's not a simple thing. The person who ends up inheriting his fortune has to do so by essentially taking part in a series of kind of battle royale style games with the rest of the family. And so they spend this weekend where there's this progression of ludicrous games that get increasingly physically dangerous as they go on. And while all of this is going on, remember the show's called Slasher, there is also a slasher on the island while all of this is going on. And spoiler, the two things turn out to be connected. And the twists and turns are ludicrous, but also because the cast are so good, you just choose to believe it. There's also a supporting character in this season who is clearly a young woman, but she's cast as like a 12, 13-year-old girl. And it's like Paula Brancati's character is married to this other guy and they've not been able to have kids, and they adopt this creepy 12/13-year-old who's clearly a grown woman. And then each of the characters has like their flashback episode where it tells you their backstory, and their backstory episode is like a haunted house movie with this creepy girl. It's fan-fucking-tastic. And yeah, there's revelations galore of all these characters. It's ludicrous. Look, if you love slashers and you love ludicrous horror, but you also like well-written, witty drama, then this show's pretty much got everything. I never see this show pop up anywhere on anybody's list of anything, and I'm like, why is this show getting so rudely ignored? It's fucking amazing. I think it's popular in Canada, but I don't think it's popular anywhere else. Like, it initially started on Netflix.
It's like Molson Light.
It started on Netflix and it got removed from Netflix after 2 seasons. And then Shudder saved it and said they will bring it back, and so it's been on Shudder the past 2 seasons. I'm hoping it keeps going because it's brought me endless fucking joy. I would say this season was probably the most predictable. The last couple of episodes, I was like, I think I know what's going on here. I got it right. But the previous season, I never actually managed to do that. So it depends. But it didn't rob me of the joy of the show. And again, it's one of those shows that if you're a regular listener of this podcast and you're tuned into the kind of shit we talk about and get enthusiastic about, if you've not watched Slasher, honestly, get in about it, because the writing on it is way smarter than it needs to be, and it still manages to deliver everything you want from a brainless slasher.
Outstanding. All right, number 9, Slasher. You heard it here first. Apparently, literally,
if you're outside Canada, you probably heard it here first.
My number 9 show of the year, Craig, is a show from the very, very start. If you can cast your mind back to Through the Mists of Time to the 1st of January 2021.
Wow. I
Yeah.
don't remember that far back.
And that show was the 3rd season of a show which is not as good as the first 2 seasons, but still thoroughly entertained me, and I bloody loved it. And that is season 3 of Cobra Kai.
Oh, right.
Which I forgot
Do you know what? I
had
completely
aired
forgot.
this year.
Yeah, I completely forgot about it.
You know Cobra Kai. I'm assuming people listening to this have at least heard of it. If you don't know it for whatever reason, Cobra Kai is the story of Johnny Lawrence, all grown up. He's a loser.
Remember that asshole from the Karate Kid?
Remember Karate Kid, guys? And his still ongoing rivalry with Daniel LaRusso, who's now a successful car salesman.
Yeah.
And on paper, this show should not work at all, but it's effortlessly charming. It almost jumped the shark at the end of season 2 with the high school karate fight, but I'm all for that kind of thing. I'm here for the nonsense. Season 3 pushes the envelope some more and starts to bring in elements from later Karate Kid movies, and it's they're really getting into the Karate Kid verse here. So much so that I'm excited for like when they bring in the next Karate Kid or something.
Yes, Hilary Swank gonna turn up. She's gonna slum it in this show.
It's a drama comedy with real heart that absolutely exceeds the expectations of a Karate Kid movie.
That part I definitely agree with. You were talking about this show for quite some time before I ever saw it. In fact, I think I watched it not long before. I think it was towards the end of last year. So it was not long before the third season came on, and I went in expecting nothing, honestly. And I remember messaging you probably several times, going, "I can't quite believe how much I'm enjoying this. This is actually really fun," and it is really well written as a drama. As you know. There's a lot of dramedies out there that do the same old beats, and I do feel like Cobra Kai has a way of, don't get me wrong, it hits a lot of the same old beats, but it does it in such a zany way that's quite fresh. And I do think the characterization for the most part is pretty solid. There are inconsistencies, I'm not going to lie. I do think the show has a problem with Johnny Lawrence, because it's like they cannot make up their mind what to do with Johnny a wee bit. They want him to be schlubby and a slob and a bit dislikable, but they also want him to be quite heroic at times. And I'm like, there comes a point where you've got to shit or get off the pot, and I do feel like there's inconsistencies in there, but it doesn't ruin the show. It's still fun. When they
first introduced Daniel LaRusso into the show, it looked like Daniel LaRusso was the bad guy.
Right.
And then obviously, as it's gone on, they've gone like, the Karate Kid can't be the bad guy in a Karate Kid TV show, and they sort of angled everything around so there was no real bad guy until John Kreese turned up and stuff. But yeah, it's inconsistent, it's a bit shaky, but god damn it, I love it. It's like a big warm sweater. Yeah. And you know what? The fact that they got Elizabeth Shue back for season 3 just
I was about
warmed
to
my
say
heart.
that.
I would have liked more
that was
Elizabeth.
Pretty great.
Yeah, I would have liked more Elizabeth Shue, because the last thing I saw Elizabeth Shue in was The Boys having her face lasered off. But
yeah, spoiler for The Boys. Yeah, that's true. And she's great, and I love that she came in and just played that role with no. It seemed like she fit quite well in that universe. She just slipped right in there. It felt very natural. Yeah, it was cool. Billy Zabka, the guy who plays Johnny, I have to say, every time I see him on social media or see interviews with him, he seems like a really decent guy. And so part of me is like, well, I'm glad that guy's getting his due, kind of thing. It is cool he's got this show like so late in his career that, and obviously he was a struggling actor for most of his career, so it's kind of cool that that's happened.
Yeah, it's the William Zabka Renaissance. It's not a thing, but maybe it is. Maybe let's start it now. Again. It's on Netflix, so if you've not seen Cobra Kai for whatever reason, if you've seen Cobra Kai and thought, I'm not going to watch a fucking Karate Kid TV show, give it a whirl, guys. Catch up before season 4 comes out. It did start as a YouTube Red original TV show,
right,
which means no one saw it.
Yeah.
And it was only people who were, were pushing it around saying, this is great, and then YouTube Red cancelled it, and Netflix picked it up, and suddenly it blew up, so...
Aye.
Cobra Kai Season 3 is my number 9 choice for top 10 TV shows of 2021.
Get in. My number 8 is... to quote Pretty Polly Muppet version. My number 8 is a factual show, also from early in the year. It is Exterminate All the Brutes. We've gone full circle here from Cobra Kai to Exterminate All the Brutes. Sorry if anybody got whiplash from that. Exterminate All the Brutes is a mini-series that is really... and it's based on a book, in fact. And it is really all about the origins of white supremacy in terms of how it became a force in the world in the process of colonization. I did talk about it many episodes ago, probably near the start of the year. And it's a combination of documentary style and also dramatization. And one of the things it does is it dramatizes moments from the European eras of colonization using the same lead actor, who is our old pal Josh Hartnett. Remember Josh Hartnett?
Holy shit. For real?
For realsies. And it's an inspired choice to use the same actor in each of these time zones, because it sort of hammers home the point that no matter what part of the world this stuff happened in, the threat was always the same. The colonization was always the same. It was always the same standard sets of rules and the same kinds of brutality being enforced. It's not an easy watch, but it's extremely rewarding. It is one of the best docu-series I've seen in a long time. The filmmaking on it is really quite exquisite in both sections. So yeah, I mean, it's if you're interested in that kind of thing, chances are you've probably seen this show already. But for anybody who hasn't, it's well worth checking out. It sort of disappeared after the end of after it stopped airing. Like, I've not seen anybody talk about it. I've not seen it appear on anybody's end of year list so far. So I'm doing the work by reminding everybody about it. Exterminate All the Brutes was a really great series. Like I say, not Saturday night viewing unless you're that kind of person. I don't know. I don't judge.
Where did it air originally, if you don't mind my asking?
I think it aired on Sky over here, so it might still be on somehow available on your Skysies, whatever your Sky apps are.
Boxes they have nowadays.
So
yeah, check it out.
Yes.
Mikey. It's the second Lost Boys joke I've made in 2 episodes, and I cut the last one out. You're not going to hear it in episode 29, but...
Boo! Bring back the Lost Boys cut.
While I'm on this, probably should mention at this point, like every single compilation of top 10s of the year of things, we're doing it at the start of December. So there's an entire month's worth of 2021 left that we're not covering. We will undoubtedly, if anything from the next month really sticks out, they'll be covered in our next year. Or it's like the tax year, but for top 10s, you know? It's December to December.
I
say
think most
that
people
because
understand it.
I'm super excited about The Witcher Season 2, which is airing in 2 weeks. But in terms of Netflix genre shows, one that started recently was the live-action adaptation of the legendary anime Cowboy Bebop.
Oh, right, aye.
Now, not going to lie, I'm not a big anime guy, but I adore Cowboy Bebop. It's one of my all-time favourite shows. Everything about that show just oozes effortless cool. The soundtrack is one of the best soundtracks of any television show I've ever heard. It's all crazy jazz. It's incredible. It influenced so many other TV shows that it's unreal. And when I heard they were doing a live-action version, I was like, why though?
Right.
But it aired and I thought, I might as well watch it. We'll give it a couple episodes, see how it is. And I got to say, I was pleasantly surprised because they somehow managed to, while still occasionally doing things like shot for shot recreating parts of episodes of the anime, give it a kind of spin of its own. It's got a really fun cast, really well made, and the most important thing of all is they got the original composer back and the original band that did the music, so it's all the same jazz music that's in it.
That's pretty good.
That is super important. If you're into jazz, are we into jazz, Craig?
Is this an episode of fSobriety? Yeah, it's not.
No, no, we're not going to have any episodes of fSobriety.
No, this is a straight ahead, no nonsense, end of year podcast. Yep. No deviations. We're behaving ourselves. We've been very strict about it. We've learned from our past mistakes. We're never going back, and we're going to watch our drinks so that we don't get too tipply. Yep. And make misjudgments about that. We are straight ahead doing the thing, the top 10s, that's it, nothing else.
Television critic, podcaster and TV writer, and one of my favourite commentators on popular culture, Mark Bernardin, somewhat ironically compared this show to Firefly, which is hilarious because Firefly is essentially Joss Whedon's rip-off of the anime Cowboy Bebop.
Ah, okay. When did the anime come out?
Back in the 90s.
But way ahead of its time. If you're unfamiliar with Cowboy Bebop, I should probably explain. It's about a sort of post-Earth apocalypse future where humanity has colonized the rest of the solar system, and it follows the crew of a ship called the Bebop, who are all bounty hunters, and it's just their adventures trying to track down bad guys. One of the bounty hunters used to be in a criminal syndicate, and one of them used to be a cop who was framed, and the other one is a woman who woke up from long cryostasis with no memories, and there's an adorable, super intelligent corgi, and it's nonsense, and everything presents a really well lived in, broken down future. It's basically like a western meets sci-fi, but with the jazz soundtrack meets film noir. And they've managed it pretty well for the live-action show. I've really enjoyed it. I think my only complaint about it, if I had to really pick a complaint that wasn't about Spike Spiegel's hair, is that fans will know what I mean by that, is that they could have cast a better actor as Vicious, because I don't buy the actor playing Vicious at all. The actor playing Vicious gives this show a kind of Xena warrior princess feel. You know, other than that, I'm all here for it, and I think they did a good job. Well done.
The only thing I've seen that I've paid attention to about this, I'll openly say I've never seen the anime.
Mm-hmm.
I've never really been an anime guy. That's a whole thing, an area of life that just passed me by. But I saw people saying that some fans were complaining that the costumes were not accurate. Do you care to comment, James Hamilton?
Spike Spiegel, the main character, dresses identically to the cartoon. I think people's problem is that John Cho is a human being and not an anime character. He is proportioned like a human and isn't super tall and super skinny, but his costume's identical. Jet Black's costume is pretty identical. Faye Valentine's costume is pretty identical. I think people are nitpicking.
Aye, I figured it would probably be something like that. It sort of reminds me of after the 2012 Judge Dredd movie came out, there were people saying, I mean, it looks cool, but it doesn't look like the comics. Why doesn't he have the big eagle on his shoulder? First of all, I point you to the Jean-Paul Gaultier design costumes from the 1995 disaster Judge Dredd movie and see how good that looks on screen.
Yep.
So there's that. But people were saying as well that the helmet's too big, and it's like, it's not. That's just how it fits on a human head. Like the drawing of Dredd's helmet is too fucking small because there's no way you can fit a human head inside that helmet. It's impossible. There are things that look great on a comic page, guys, that don't look good in real life, and likewise in an anime. You got to make concessions for human anatomy. I'm sorry to tell you.
Curse you, human anatomy. But yeah, that is recommended by me, number 8.
Concessions for Human Anatomy, incidentally, is my favourite album by The Fall.
If it's Gillian Anderson and Marquis Smith.
On bolt cutters. It's The Fall.
Craig, why don't you tell us what your number 7 pick for top 10 is?
James, I can't wait to tell you. So I won't. My number 7 pick and my top 10 TV of 2021, had to remind myself what fucking year this is. Pandemic year 2. Or 3, technically. Anyway, my number 7 is Midnight Mass, which is very bleak, very human, very down to earth, but nonetheless manages to encompass just enough of the horror genre that it will absolutely keep genre fans extremely happy. One of the things I like about Mike Flanagan is that he is someone who is very concerned with humanity, and no matter what project he's doing, all of his horror movies and all of the TV stuff he's done for Netflix, all of it has humanity at its core. He's very interested in people. And Midnight Mass, I have to say, is probably his most, and I know this is a word that some people hear, they will run to the hills, and sometimes in certain contexts I will as well, but I don't mean it in a pejorative, I mean it absolutely in a positive way. This is his most mature work to date, I think. It absolutely plays out as 100% just a very well written drama that takes place in a fairly secluded island community, with very real characters with very real traumas in their past, very naturalistic acting styles. I'll say a wee bit more about some of the acting in just a second, but it does all of this while on top of that it also has a major supernatural element in the plot. It does that brilliant thing that I think the best supernatural horror stories do, where they don't treat the supernatural as something so crazy that it can't be understood. It instead is introduced as something that everyone who encounters it automatically has an interpretation of what it is. And because the first person to come into contact with it is the new local parish priest, played brilliantly by star of Legion Hamish Linklater, and probably my favourite TV performance of the year. He is incredible in this role.
Damn, high praise.
Yeah, no, he's fantastic. It's one of those performances that seems almost like you're watching a documentary. It's that realistic a performance. Even when he's up on the pulpit and doing all the animated preacher stuff, it's like he just seems so believable. And it's one of those performances that I think some people, if they wanted to be nitpicky, would say is mannered because he does a lot of umming and ahhing. But to me, he delivered it in such a way that seemed very real to me.
If people listen to our unedited podcast, they'd hear how much umming and ahhing people do when they talk.
Aye, exactly. But it's an incredible performance. He's very charismatic, but also very vulnerable. And the rest of this cast are fantastic. It is some of Mike Flanagan's regular repertory company. The great Rahul Kohli turns up as
We
the
love
town
that
sheriff. He's great, and he's actually quite subdued in this role, but it's a great character. He's the local sheriff and the only non-Christian pretty much on the island. So you can imagine for yourself how that goes. It's a very conservative island, and the storyline deals a lot with different past traumas. Like, one of the characters is an alcoholic, and he has this thing in his past where he went to prison because he caused the death of a young woman in a traffic accident after being drunk at the wheel. And so he comes back to the island in a state of shell shock and kind of trying to find some meaning in his life, but feeling he's never going to find it here, and the only reason he's back here is because he's got nowhere else to go, essentially. And one of the other characters is his childhood friend, played by the great Kate Siegel, who is in pretty much every Mike Flanagan project. I only discovered recently they are in fact married in real life, so I guess that would explain that. She's a fantastic actor though, and she's one of those people that every time I see her in Flanagan stuff, I'm like, get this woman a better agent, because the only time I see her and stuff is in his projects. And I'm like, she is a great actor, she's amazing. Her character has an equally traumatic past, but she's sort of done the opposite of the other character I just mentioned, where she's turned to religion. Whereas the guy who's returned to the island is feeling very nihilistic about things, very cynical about religion. But they have this very close relationship, and you can feel there are moments that people have criticised about this show, and I actually watched the Red Letter Media review of this show. They were very keen on it, but they were commenting on the fact that a lot of people had said, oh, there are so many monologues in this show, and they had a lot of fun with it. And guys, there's a lot of fucking monologues in this show. If you don't like actors monologuing, this might not be the show for you, but I urge you to push past that because it's worth it.
Who doesn't love a good monologue, though?
Well, the point that Red Letter Media were making is that that's good characterization. This is actually the characters talking to each other and realising each other's journey and kind of realising where they're from. And when the performances are this good, I'll happily watch any actor monologue the fuck out of dialogue, or dialogue, monologue, you know what I mean.
Yep.
It's spellbound and it's really great stuff, and it's like watching a great play. Nobody ever complains that there's too many monologues in a play, you know. So I really recommend it highly. It's also beautifully made. I mean, all of Flanagan's stuff looks really lush, and that's another thing I really like about him. Mm-hmm. He is very concerned with how to direct stuff well. That sounds like a prosaic statement, but he's got a great way of identifying which scenes need a particular style of direction. Like
he's not like your average jobbing TV or Hollywood director, where he goes like, get things in frame, record, next. He has his own MO.
he puts a hell of a lot of thought into each scene, and you can tell, okay, I think I need to try it. This might be difficult to do, but I'm going to try this. I think it's right for the scene. I'm reminded particularly, if anybody's ever watched his Haunting of Hill House, there's one particular episode where the whole thing, it's a dummy, but it looks like a oneer. Mm-hmm. But it's interrupted by flashbacks that are not in oneers. And that whole episode is so beautifully constructed. And a lot of people say, well, that's a gimmick doing that. And it's like, well, actually, it's not a gimmick, because he uses it. First of all, that episode is when the family have all come together at the funeral home and they're all getting to know what each other is. And once again, many monologues. But the camera does such clever stuff, like doing full revolutions of the room, catching all the actors' reactions to what's been said. And then there's things going on in the background as the camera passes over that you might just miss. And there's also a beautiful moment where the characters are exchanged with their childhood counterparts as the camera revolves around. It's beautiful. There's a scene like that in this. I think it's might be the second or third episode, but it took me a while to notice that the first 10 minutes of that episode were a oneer, and I was like, holy fucking shit. And it's on a beach, and it follows different members of the cast as they each interact with each other. And it was a few minutes in, I was like, wait a minute, have we cut from this? I don't think we have. And it just went on for about 10 minutes. Like, that is really fucking good. And it wasn't done to be flashy. It's because it was done at a moment where all of these characters are dealing with something that has happened at the beach. Mm-hmm. And it was just a great way for them all to interact with each other until you really get where every character's headspace is in that moment. And that's good. It's beautiful filmmaking. He's also a fantastic director of actors, fundamentally. I've seen so many actors give great performances in his stuff.
I've not seen the show, but I have seen Rahul Kohli talking about that.
Yeah, all of his cast speak very highly of him. I've never seen any actor say a bad word about him. He seems to be really tuned into how actors work, and he's very keen to kind of get the best out of them, and he does it every time. I don't know if have you seen his movie Doctor Sleep, which is like the quasi-sequel to The Shining?
I've not. I've got a bunch of his stuff backed up to watch, and I've not watched any of it, but over the holidays I'm going to have to just go on a binge fest. Because I've heard Doctor Sleep is surprisingly good.
It's a really decent movie, yeah. I mean, but don't go in expecting something akin to Stanley Kubrick's The Shining. That's a very unfair way to walk into that movie. Mm-hmm. It doesn't have the elemental terror of The Shining. It's very much more a kind of adventure story that happens to have a horror aspect to it. But Ewan McGregor plays the grown-up Danny Torrance.
Fuck off!
Yeah, right.
These are my things. Sorry.
Flanagan gets a great performance out of him. He's very emotive, really great, and I think the actress's name is Alex Esso, who plays in flashback Wendy Torrance, and she's done up to look exactly like Shelley Duvall.
Damn.
And now you remember how distinctive Shelley Duvall's performance is in The Shining.
Yep.
Alex Esso imitates her so fucking well, it's spooky. And it's like, only a great director can get a performance like that doesn't seem like a pastiche, you know? It feels very natural, but at the same time you're like, holy shit, that is 100% a Shelley Duvall. So yeah, he's great, and this Midnight Mass, it plays to all his strengths. I think I said this before when I mentioned it in the podcast before. The supernatural element is usually a genre phenomenon that I'm not that keen on, and usually it's a genre I avoid. But it sort of doesn't matter because it's employed in Midnight Mass in a way that ties right into the philosophical core of what this story is, and it's treated exactly the way it needs to be treated, and in a way I don't think I've ever seen before. In fact, the word itself, and you'll know what the word is when you watch the show, is never mentioned in the show at all.
Oh.
So, yeah, it's pretty cool.
Okay, yeah, it's definitely on my to-watch list. From multiple recommendations, but especially now. And number 7 with a bullet for me in my top 10 is, hey Craig.
James.
Remember David E. Kelly?
Oh, Jerry Horn from Twin Peaks?
I think I'm high!
No, that's the other David Kelly.
Yeah. Remember Leanne Moriarty? Remember Nicole Kidman?
Oh, wait, I know what this is. Remember Martin Donovan? You better delete.
I can't stand the quiet!
So yeah, the team behind Big Little Lies has come back with
Bigger, Littler Lies.
Number 7, a show that I mentioned briefly on the podcast, 9 Perfect Strangers, based on the Leanne Moriarty novel of the same name, adapted for television by David E. Kelly and produced by and starring Nicole Kidman, who is just an absolute revelation. We all know Nicole Kidman's a good actor.
I was going to say, is your revelation the right word?
Well, I don't know it's hard to explain her performance in this because it's like, if you imagine Nicole Kidman trying to do an impression of Bjork on shrooms, you're about halfway to where she gets in
that
this
sounds like the
performance.
kind of thing that if it was going to happen, I would expect it to have been directed by Lars von Trier.
It's, you know what? This has actually got a little bit of the Von Triers about it.
Really?
On occasion.
Okay.
Yeah. The storyline is, I believe I mentioned this before, it's a wellness retreat, a very exclusive wellness retreat, run by Nicole Kidman's character, where she invites rich people, not just anyone can buy their way in. She screens people to come to her wellness retreat and puts them through a series of treatments, quote-unquote, and exercises, which, as the series goes on, you realise it involves microdosing them with psilocybin and, in some cases, MDMA. And it starts to get trippier and trippier as she ups their dosages. And then it comes to light that someone died at her wellness retreat thanks to this quote-unquote treatment that she's been doing. Things get absolutely insane, super trippy, super dark.
Wow.
And it's brilliant.
As you're describing it, it's giving me vibes of the first season of Homecoming.
You know what? It is not dissimilar in feel.
Yeah.
If Homecoming had a bunch of really fucked up psychedelic moments in it, it would be of a similar thing. The cast is absolutely incredible. I've already mentioned that Nicole Kidman, in case anyone's never heard of her, she's a good actor.
Up and coming Australian actress Nicole Kidman.
I think she'll go far. She should stick at it.
She should stick at it.
Melissa McCarthy, absolutely brilliant in it. Doing like an almost completely straight ahead comedy-less role. She does a little bit of comedy, but Melissa McCarthy's incredible in it. What a great dramatic actor. I forgot that she was in Gilmore Girls because I've not seen it for years and years.
Aye.
And I was like, oh yeah, that's right. She can actually just do regular acting. That's not like, oh, I'm a Ghostbuster. You know?
Right, aye.
Our fave, Bobby Cannavale, is in it. And once again,
Yes, it is Homecoming.
yeah, Bobby Cannavale, absolutely brilliant in it as
I love him.
a former American football player with an injury who's depressed, and he wears a Styx t-shirt, which is I'm convinced is a Mr. Robot nod. Samara Weaving is in it. Samara Weaving is barely recognisable in it because she's playing someone who's had a lot of plastic surgery, so she's got a lot of cosmetic stuff done to her face for it, where she's got like I saw an interview with her and they put like a wire around her face to make it look like she's had a facelift, and she's got big fake teeth and stuff, so she doesn't look like she's wearing a bunch of fake face makeup, but she looks like she's had a lot of work done.
Wow.
She's incredible in it, and just the whole show is absolutely fantastic. Oh yeah, and of course Manny Jacinto is in it. He's the funny guy from The Good Place, the Florida guy from the Good Place. But I've only ever seen him do like stupid comedy before, and as a dramatic actor, he's absolutely great. Again, I've spoiled a little about the dosing stuff, but it becomes pretty obvious that that's what's going on when they're being fed special juice.
It's a callback.
But yeah, highly recommended. And if they do any more dramatizations of Leanne Moriarty's work, I'll definitely watch that shit.
Sweet.
So there you go, guys. Number 7, 9 Perfect Strangers, available on that Amazon they have nowadays. If you have that, give Jeff Bezos some money. He's a bit short.
He's down to his last spaceship. Well, speaking of dramas that are perhaps not quite as happy-go-lucky and carefree and holly-jolly as some of the other stuff we've talked about, my number 6 pick for my top 10 TV of 2021 is Somos, which is a Mexican series on Netflix, Mexican limited series, which I'm just going to straight up say up front, this is a harrowing series. It's not an easy thing to watch. But it's essentially a dramatization of the Allende massacre that took place in 2011. It was perpetrated by the Los Zetas cartel, but it has a long, complex background that the TLDR in it all, of it all, is that essentially it was the US DEA who are actually to blame for this. I know, as stunning as it might seem. It is fictionalised to a certain extent, but it deals very much with a lot of first-person testimony, and it's very well acted, and it's really beautifully shot, and when the horror arrives, it does not shy away from it, and it's a really strange experience, unsettling experience to watch, because you spend most of it knowing where it's going to go, and so you know what's about to happen to this town, and so you start to get this real sick feeling in your gut as you get to know these characters, knowing that they are based on people from real life. It's incredibly powerful. I have not seen any chat about this at all. Like when it was, I think it was in the middle of the summer or early summer it came on, and you know me, James, something's Mexican, I'll just watch it. And given that the other stuff that I was watching round about this time was another Mexican show that I'll, spoiler, might be talking about later, that was a million miles away from this stylistically, and you know, just in terms of tone and everything else. Then this arrived, I was like, oh, cool, I'll watch this. And I knew, I did know about the facts that it was based on before I watched it. So I wasn't entirely sure what to expect, because there's always a problem with making any dramatization of anything like this, is you run the risk of being exploitative about it.
Oh yeah, especially something as tragic and as violent.
Yeah, right. And this, to its credit, does sort of avoid doing that. I can't really say too much about it without just going into grim details or just kind of hammering home the point about how tragic it is. I will just say it's incredibly well acted. The cast in it are so good, and I think they are basically unknowns, because I was looking this up and not many of the main cast seem to have appeared in much else, but they do a fantastic job. The other thing that made me interested in it is actually co-written by Fernanda Melchor, who is a Mexican novelist whose work I really like, and a lot of her fiction is based on real life crimes. So it does. Spoiler, I'm going to be mentioning her again at some point in this podcast.
Oh, okay.
But she has that real ability to take the most heinous things you can imagine and bring some kind of weird lyrical quality to them. And it's a strange thing to do, you might think, in a story that's about a real-life tragedy, but the lyricism is applied in just the right places. And it feels... This series never lets you one moment forget that what you're watching is quote-unquote real, you know?
It's funny that you say that it's been relatively unknown, because especially around maybe this year and last year, I know a lot of people... I've never watched it myself, so maybe I'm bullshitting like this, but I know a lot of people are mad for that show Narcos, which is all about drug dealers and stuff in Latin America, and I would have thought that something that is adjacent to that would have maybe got a bit more popularity, but maybe it's because it is a Mexican production. You would assume that it would get more kind of traction.
You would, maybe. Yeah, it's hard to say why there's not been that big a deal about it. I've seen very few places. I think Vulture had an article about it, which is where I first saw anything about it at all. Maybe like within days of it being on Netflix, but other than that, very quiet. I've not seen anybody talk about it, but it's well worth watching. It's a very well made short series. It's 6 episodes. It's not the most cheerful thing you'll watch, but it's a beautifully made series, and you know, it's imperative. It's about a very important subject, and I did notice actually it is executive produced by US producers, so there is a US hand in this, but there seems to have been none, or at least very little attempt to say, can we tone down the blaming the US part?
Right. Maybe that explains, not to go all conspiracy guy here, but maybe that's
right. Maybe, yeah. I mean, it is quite. The show is quite clear about where it lays the blame. I mean, obviously, the people who commit the massacre are the ones who actually commit the massacre, but it's very clear about what leads up to it, and it makes that point quite forthrightly. So yeah, I recommend it. If it sounds like something that you're interested in and that you'll enjoy, then chances are you probably will.
Outstanding. On the list. At number 6, Craig, my first non-English language show of my top 10, a show I did mention previously.
I thought you were going to say of your life.
That's the first for me.
Yeah, of course, I had to watch the dubbed version.
I don't want to read when I'm watching TV. Come on, fuck. No, a Korean show on Netflix came out at the end of December last year, so it still counts in our December to December top 10s tax year. Sweet Home.
Right, You have mentioned this, but refresh our memories.
So, for those not in the know, Sweet Home is based on a Korean webcomic, I believe, and the story follows a group of people in an apartment block in Seoul who find themselves caught in the grips of the apocalypse. It's essentially a zombie apocalypse, but rather than people...
Is there any other kind?
But rather than turning into zombies, people turn into monsters based on their personality to some degree. And as the show goes on, it becomes clear that it's not an infection, it's a curse based on personality, and it's so weird, and the monster effects in it are grotesque. The storyline is super gripping. There's some really great characters in it. The star of it is Song Kang, who is a suicidal kid who, on the day he's going to kill himself, the apocalypse breaks out.
Of all the luck.
Yeah, he's one of the first people to become quote-unquote infected, but his desire to die stops him from turning into a monster. And then, as the show progresses, he decides he doesn't want to die and becomes more monstrous, but because he has such strong willpower, as it turns out, he's able to hold the monstrousness in. It's very, very Korean.
Yeah.
The whole cast are brilliant. It's difficult to describe. Visually, it's absolutely stunning. It's weird. It's horrific. It's funny. There's some really good child actors in it. And I'm always surprised when you see like really young child actors in stuff and the stuff they're in is fucking brutal and horrible.
Right.
Like, how do they react to that on set? But yeah, there's some really good little kids in it that have to deal with like a guy who's just a giant eyeball, or like the most badass female character I've seen all year, driving a fire truck and then having it kicked over by a giant.
Wow.
It's fucking crazy, man.
Sounds like something fans of Doom Patrol might enjoy.
Do you know what? Genuinely, I think it is, to use one of our oft-used phrases that we decided we would never use, it's hell's a poppin', man.
Or, in the case of this podcast, jingle bells are popping. I'm here all Christmas.
Joke of the episode, we're this early. Fucking hell. But yeah, it's the first of 2 South Korean shows in my top 10. I bet you can't guess what the second one is.
It's probably something really obscure that no one's ever heard of.
Yeah, highly recommended. Number 6 for me, Sweet Home on Netflix. Go check it out.
I just want to interject and say, you saying that was the joke of the episode, it might well be, but let's not second guess ourselves. There might be something better down the line. But it just reminded me, my favourite joke that I've ever made in the history of this podcast was on last year's Christmas episode, when you were just talking about Reese Witherspoon's Renaissance, and I said, would you describe these as Reese's Pieces de Resistance, which I think might be the best joke I've ever made.
It is a pretty incredible joke.
And yes, any pedants out there, yes, I know it's pronounced pièce de résistance, but that wouldn't work with the joke.
Also, you did almost top it with see what happens when you tuck a stranger in the grass.
Anyway, we're not here to kiss my joking ass.
Top 10 Craig's jokes from the last year.
So my number 5 in my top 10 TV of 2021 is a show I know we've both watched, and that is Mayor of Easttown.
I'm just going to interject here, Craig, and say my number 5
Go
is
for it.
Mayor of Easttown.
How about that? Alright, let's talk Mayor of Easttown.
Yeah.
Interesting, we both landed right in the middle.
Yeah, I came quite late to this show. I think I watched it after everyone else. It was mostly on your recommendation, but I thoroughly enjoyed it.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really solidly written drama. Kate Winslet is superb in it. Turns out Kate Winslet's a pretty good actress.
She should stick at it.
Yeah, it's one of those shows that the world it's set in is really richly drawn. Like, all the supporting cast are very complex. Everybody's got their own life. Everybody's got their own shit that they're dealing with.
Everyone's got that fucking accent.
Right, yeah. It's Pennsylvania, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a very distinctive accent. And, you know, it's beautifully made as well. It's another show that looks really nice. That whole town looks so fucking bleak all the way through it.
It does. Plot-wise, it kept me guessing right up to the end.
Yeah, it does that.
It does it. It does at least a couple of bait and switches where you're like,
It does.
I knew it was that guy. I knew it was that guy. And you're like, oh no, it's not that guy.
And there's a couple of jaw-dropping moments in it where you're like, okay, did not expect that to happen.
Oh, press F.
You press F for a certain character. If you've not seen Mayor of Easttown, we'll try not to spoil anything here because it's worth going in completely clean. But great performances all round. Actually, the supporting cast are all pretty great. Get Evan Peters in there, of course, who he's great for lots of reasons in this role, but I have to say, stand out for me, he gives what I think is one of the best drunk performances I've ever seen.
I am not convinced that he wasn't actually drunk on set that day. That was I know as an actor his job is to act certain ways professionally.
Yeah.
But my God, I'm sure they must have just like filled him up, or they did lots of takes of that scene and he got more drunk as they went on, and then they used the last one. But yeah, man, it was so good.
Yeah, I feel like I've been in a pub and that guy, complete stranger, has come and talked to me out the blue. In some Glasgow pub, and it's just been that, but in a Glaswegian accent. It was superb, absolutely magnificent piece of drunk acting.
As a protagonist, Kate Winslet as Mayor is one of the most simultaneously likeable and despicable leads I've seen in a show in a long time.
Right,
because I thought she was brilliant, but also she is a fucking scumbag. Like, an absolute dirtbag.
Yeah, I mean, she's not an admirable human being, but Winslet's performance is so compelling that you feel you don't mind going along with this scumbag. You had a phrase that you encapsulated in something to do with Twin Peaks. Can you remind us?
Oh yeah, right. So basically, between the relationship of Kate Winslet and Evan Peters' characters, Mayor of Easttown is like Twin Peaks if the main character of the main point of view character was Harry Truman, and Harry Truman was a piece of shit.
Harry Truman is more like Chad.
Yeah. Chad Truman.
Chad of Easttown.
Twin dinners.
Nice. These are hip references to 2017's Twin Peaks Return.
Welcome back, Twin Peaks listeners.
Another thing I really liked about the show, I mean, there was lots, right? We can just say something about how the plot is constructed in just a moment because that deserves its own praise. But one thing I wanted to say, in terms of supporting cast, I actually thought the casting of Guy Pearce in that particular role was a really inspired choice.
Right.
Guy Pearce is a really charming and handsome guy, I think we can all agree. And I don't know about you, see, for the first half of this show, I was expecting there to be some twist where he turned out to be the villain.
Yeah.
Because I've seen so many shitty detective dramas where shit like that turns out to be the case. And that does not, spoiler guys, that does not happen. Better things happen than that.
Yeah, no, I was like, right, come on. Guy Pearce is in this. Look at how fucking handsome he is. The silver fox, velvety voiced motherfucker.
Yeah.
He is absolutely the bad guy, and he's not.
What I liked about how they played that was Mare is completely in control of that relationship. There's never a moment where she's not in control. And he doesn't have any animosity towards the fact she's in control. I actually liked it. It was just a very... I'm just going to use that word again. It was a very mature relationship between two adult human beings, just handled completely responsibly. And I don't know if I've ever seen that done in quite that way. It seemed like a fucking novelty when it shouldn't. Especially
not in like a sort of procedural crime drama.
Right, aye, exactly. Well, there was no shortage of toxicity elsewhere in this show, but I just thought, it really strikes me that this is actually just a fairly normal relationship between two adults of a certain age who are like, okay, we're both in for no bullshit, we'll see where this goes, and that is literally their plot. And I was like, okay, that's cool, I actually quite appreciate that.
Plus, of a time that this show came out, you're talking about a TV show where it's a murder, it's a police procedural essentially, and it's very of its time because it does not present the police as here's the good guys coming to solve the murder. It's like, here's the police. Ew.
Yes, yeah. That's a good point, actually. I mean, the police in the show are synonymous with a certain level of skullduggery and a certain level of grime, not the music genre. That would be a different show. Starring Idris Elba, maybe, in the role. But yeah, I mean, there's a lot of really quite bold stuff going on in this show that doesn't immediately strike you as bold because the show does a good job of enveloping you in the story. But when you sit back and look at it in retrospect, it's like, I couldn't quite put my finger on it while I was watching it, and now I'm looking at it like, yo, shit, yeah, that is actually quite exciting what they were doing there, because there aren't that many, even now today, in the era of troubled anti-heroes, I still feel like the subject of the morality or otherwise of the police as a force in society is still treated quite delicately, or when it's not treated delicately, there are I'm the kind of person I will still come away and go and have huge caveats because I'm a nitpicker that way and go, okay, but still they did not quite criticise the institution of the police as much as I would have liked. And to be fair, I don't know that they go as far as I would have liked in Mayor of Easttown either, but they go pretty far.
Yeah, especially considering it's like a small town, it's a small police force. So it would have been easy for them to be like, oh, but these are the good ones.
That's true, yeah, and they choose not to do that. Yeah, it's gripping stuff, and it's, again, incredibly well acted, really well written. It's just, it's TV 101. This is what you want from quality drama.
Yep, quick shout out to Jean Smart, of course, for being...
Oh yes, the great Jean Smart, yeah.
Just being incredible yet again.
It's crazy how much great shit she's been in the last few years. Watchmen and Legion and Fargo, playing very, very strong characters. Yeah, she's great. All right, so that's that. Abrasive number 5s are Mare of Easttown.
Ranking highly in both of our top 10s. Good job.
So my next pick for number 4 of my top TV of 2021 is the Steve McQueen produced Uprising, which was a 3-part series on BBC that deals with certain tumultuous events in London in the late 70s, early 80s. And I talked about the first episode on this podcast before. Yep. The first episode deals specifically with the New Cross fire, but each episode is roughly an hour. That first episode, I would say more than half of it doesn't specifically deal with the New Cross fire. It deals with events leading up to it. And it's one of those great things that Steve McQueen does, that he gives you such great, rich context for the background of all of the things that were going culturally in London at that time with regards like Caribbean immigrants and their larger communities and the kind of impact they were having on British culture generally through things like reggae and all the rest of it, and also talking a great deal about the political background, about how this was just not that long after Powell's Great Rivers of Blood speech, which if you don't know what that is, just Google it.
When we say Great Rivers of Blood, we don't mean it was a great speech.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
we mean Enoch Powell was a toxic piece of shit who did a great deal to really ignite white supremacy and racism in the UK at that particular time.
One of Britain's foremost Nazis.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, and that first episode spent a lot of time in that stuff, but it was very rewarding that it did so. But one of the clever things that it did was it was interviewing eyewitnesses from the New Cross fire about those things. Which I thought was really clever, and Steve McQueen's always good. He of course did Small Axe last year, which was in my list from last year. And there's nothing dramatised in this series; it's all purely documentary. But it's constructed in that way that Steve McQueen can only do. It's very, very clever, and it's very, very keyed into all the great cultural concerns. And the next two go well into the 80s, and there's also like with all this stuff, there's great use of stock footage. He's like the not evil Adam Curtis.
What's going to make the joke very similar to
when he constructs a lot of really great montages out of stock footage.
Adam Curtis's fucking Shutterstock account is like Jeff Bezos' space bill.
But I mean, it's the kind of thing, if you're really interested in the culture of that era in the UK at that time, specifically London, and the impact of the Afro-Caribbean contribution to culture, and also just about the Afro-Caribbean experience in the UK of that era, which obviously remains to this day relevant, given that it was only 2 years ago that the Windrush scandal came to light. It's very rich. It's only, like I say, it's only 3 episodes. It'll take up about 3 hours of your time. You will feel like you've watched a whole series of like 8 episodes, because it's just, he packs so much into this. And it's one of the things I really like about Steve McQueen is that he will give voice to people not only who are not listened to on any other platform, but he will give them the opportunity to describe not just the moments that were relevant with regards to their involvement in them at the time, but he will allow them to contextualise their own experience. For example, with the New Cross fire stuff, the fact he got all those people who were eyewitness to that to explain their own experience in the decade prior and how they felt that contextualised the New Cross fire, it creates a really rich tapestry of experience. I mean, it really is the equivalent of a good, well-written non-fiction book on the subject. So, big recommend for Uprising.
My number 4, Craig. This little known show. It's a little cult TV show on Netflix that hardly anyone has ever heard of, and I think it's important I bring it to the attention of our listening audience. The little South Korean drama that could. Number 4 for me is Squid Game.
Okay.
And honestly, I don't think I need to talk about it, because no one listening to this show is going to go, "Oh, Squid Game. What's that then?"
I think if there's one show from this year that everybody has seen by now, it's probably that one.
I think
and
so.
I use the everybody in quotes. Obviously, I mean not literally everybody, but you know what I mean. If you don't know what Squid Game is, then I don't know. Get out of the cave you've been living in.
It was the most viewed thing on Netflix.
Aye.
This year. It broke all kinds of records. But honestly, it deserves all the praise it got. I thought it was fantastic.
I'll insert here, this is one of the things I crammed in the last week or so, because I knew we were doing this episode. So I thought I'd better get around to watching stuff I've not seen that's probably relevant. I am on the same boat as Limmy, who said in his review on Twitter, just watch Squid Game. I liked it. I didn't love it. And I feel the same. It's good, certainly. But I didn't love it. It didn't fit my top 10. But it has a lot of things that I like in it.
So I love the production design of the hall they have to walk through to go between the games.
Yeah, that was super cool.
Yeah.
And the characterization generally was pretty solid. There were the odd moments here and there that I thought, I feel like some of these characters are acting in a different show.
Oh yeah, but, some of it's very, very arch. Like some of the... There's a lot of overacting in this show. But I think that's just par for the course in South Korean dramas. A lot of time emotion is really heightened, because a lot of time in Sweet Home as well, for example, a lot of the acting is very bombastic and like, whoa! You know.
But no, I think it's a fine addition to the canon of that also includes things like Battle Royale, from 20 odd year ago,
Yep.
which I still think is a great movie.
Oh yeah.
And it has, I found it quite hilarious, some of the reactions to Squid Game, particularly from people on the right who have decided that it's about communism. When the show makes it as clear as it possibly fucking could do that it's specifically about late capitalism.
Yep. It could not be more anti-capitalist if it was called Anti-Capitalist Game.
Yeah, even if it was, they would still find a way to say, oh, well, that's ironic because it's actually about communism.
Yeah. The giant gold piggy bank filling with money.
The South Korean producers of this show are actually criticising North Korea or something. Like, okay, dude, whatever. These people are fucking mental. There's nothing you can do for them.
Yep. What colour's the sky? It's communist. But yeah, so I'm putting that in there, number 4. Like I said, we don't need to talk about it that much, but fuck it. It's
Fair
in
dues.
there. I thoroughly enjoyed it. And I'm excited for season 2.
Oh, is there actually going to be a season 2?
I think so.
I did not hear that.
I might have made that up.
You may have heard it here first and we'll never hear it again.
They can't just have the lead actor get that crazy red haircut at the end and not be going, and this is what he's going to look like in season 2. How about you, Craig? What's your number 3?
All right, into the top 3 of my top telly of 2021. And number 3 is a wee kind of sitcom / dramedy. It's Reservation Dogs and it's on FX.
Oh, nice.
So anybody who doesn't know, Reservation Dogs is, as I said, a low-key comedy drama set in rural Oklahoma about a group of young indigenous, in their late teens, I guess. Although I did realise only recently that one of the actresses is actually well into her late 20s, but she looks like a kid. But the young cast is great, and they're basically, on the one hand, slightly miscreants, like they get up to no good, but then on the other hand, they also fight crime. It's a complicated business. But their dream is to get enough money together to go and basically move to California. That is their romanticised location, as indeed it is, canonically, for many disenfranchised people in the United States. It's a great pop culture thing. That this show actually treats in quite a fresh way. It's a show that actually pulls the rug out about halfway through because it lets you think this is going to be a routine sitcom. Okay, what's the jape going to be this episode? Mm-hmm. But very quickly, character possession takes over. And to the point where in the second half of the season, all of the main cast have their individual episode where they're the protagonist.
Oh.
And it reminded me a wee bit of Donald Glover's Atlanta in that sense.
I was actually going to just say that when you said that. I was going to say it sounds like it's got an Atlanta kind of vibe to it.
It's a similar kind of deal. And each of this young cast are so good. I was so impressed with the skill of acting they all brought. And the characters are so well written. You do fall in love a wee bit with each of these characters. They're kind of adorable at the same time as being on occasion really irritating, just like real teenagers.
Yep.
And the background of each of these characters is really complex. It's really layered, and it all comes to some sort of end game in the 8th and final episode. It's a really short season. I mean, it's only like 25-minute episodes, and it's 8 episodes. It goes by very, very quickly. Yep. But it manages to pack a lot of great characterization in those episodes. And there is an end game that takes place where, spoiler, but you're probably not going to guess this anyway, their plan does not quite come to fruition, except that there is a wee bit of dissolution among the ranks towards the end. That's what I will say. And it's quite heartbreaking when it happens. But at the same time, you're like, oh, well, good for them. You're good for one of those characters for doing that. You get so involved with these characters' lives that it gets very complicated with where your loyalties lie. There is some absolutely delicious comedy. There's some real laugh out loud moments in it. For the most part, it's low key, but when the laugh out loud moments come, they are fucking amazing. I think it's the 3rd or 4th episode where one of the characters who has a kind of troubled relationship with his father, who it turns out lives in another state, and is a self-styled gangster rapper. It shows you one of his videos at the start. It is one of the funniest things I've seen outside the Donald Glover's Atlanta, actually. It had me in pain laughing at it. All the supporting cast are great as well. The actress who plays that young character's mother is superb, and there's a running joke where all of the men in town kind of want to get in about her. She's kind of got no time for them. Also among the supporting cast is our old pal John McClane from season 2 of Fargo. He plays the local cop. He's a complete goofball and a bit of an idiot, and it's really fun to see him play such a light-hearted role.
He's always the serious or scary guy.
Yes, exactly. Why it's fun to see him flip that around, and I love him. He's a great actor. He's got great presence on screen. And there's one of the episodes actually where one of the kids goes on a drive around with him, and they end up having such great chemistry, and there's some beautiful comedy moments in that episode. And funnily enough, the following episode, I think the one right after that, is the one where the young actress, whose name is DeVere Jacobs, I believe, who plays Laura. She's the one I was talking about, who's actually well into her late 20s, I think. She has her own story where she meets up with a character who's like a friend of her family. That character is played by Bill Burr, who I'm not normally a fan of, but I have to admit he's a good actor.
I've got a soft spot for Bill Burr. Sometimes he's a bit on the sort of, fucking comedies, whatever you want to say.
Yes,
fuck you.
Yeah, exactly. And that element of him I find fucking tiresome. But he's actually a good actor.
Yes, he was in an episode of The Mandalorian, a couple episodes in The Mandalorian, actually, weirdly.
All right.
And he was great in that. And I find some of his stand-up really funny.
It's got moments, aye. I don't have that much a dog in the fight, so it doesn't really matter. But I will say the guy is a good actor. Anytime I see him acting, he's really fucking good. And the episode he has in this, it's really beautiful, and he actually brings real pathos to that episode. And the young character who plays the young actress plays Laura. She's so great, and I will say this is established in the first episode. One of the former members of the gang has died about a year before the story starts, and it turns out he's committed suicide. You learn that fairly quickly, and this episode with Bill Burr is the one where she comes to reckon with it, and it's a really beautiful moment between her and Bill Burr that had me close to tears, and I was like, wow, this is really great television. And this is how much this show can give you whiplash, because the very next episode, in fact, I'll tell you this, there's also a running motif where one of the characters keeps having visions of presumably one of his ancestors. And there's a whole joke about the ancestor just calls him weak and all the rest of it. You need to get your shit together. But the ancestor himself is also a bit of a goofball. And it turns out he didn't really take part in all the battles he said he took part in. And there's a lot of great comedy like that. It's got teeth. I mean, it's got real socio-political teeth as well. There's some great stuff in it. For 8 compact episodes, it packs a hell of a lot of stuff in. And I was thrilled to learn it's already been renewed for a second season. So that's something to look forward to in 2022.
Nice. My number 3 is another show I don't feel I need to talk that much about, because it's a show we have discussed previously on this podcast.
Ooh.
But my number 3 show, don your social disticuff boxing gloves, Craig.
Okay, I know what's
at
coming.
number 3, I've put Marvel Disney's WandaVision, because it's a show that, thinking back, I rewatched it, and we had differing opinions over certain elements of it. I came to 2 conclusions about it. One, the ending was shite. I defended it on this podcast, but on rewatch I was like, man, I really fucking was clutching at straws to defend this. About 4/5 of it was some of my favourite TV of 2021, and it just gives me fuzzy adorbs feelings. It's one of my favourite things that the MCU has done ever. I'm here for that level of just like daft Disney storytelling. So I'm not going to say, in case you've not heard of WandaVision, I am just going to say I thought it was great, and I'm super excited for Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness next year, because it's the continuation of Wanda's story, essentially. I thought it was great.
Well, all I'll say is, as this podcast will attest, I really enjoyed watching the first 2/3 of that show. For new listeners, if you want to go back and find those episodes, they're easy enough to find.
Yep,
the one where we talk about
3
episodes. 3 episodes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We did one halfway through where we were super enthusiastic. One towards the end where your enthusiasm had waned a little.
Waning slightly. And then the final one of it is called Social Disticuffs. So that'll be easy for you to find it. Is where I'm not going to lie, I went on to something of a rant about why I disliked it.
Worth a listen, though.
It's quite
Good
lengthy.
episode. Good ep.
But to be clear, I don't judge anyone harshly for enjoying that show. Like I say, I enjoyed at least 2/3 of it. But by the time I got to the end, I was like, I feel like I've wasted my time with this show. I had already, it was a bitter pill for me because I'd already been thoroughly disinterested with the MCU for a while. I was exhausted with the MCU, and that roped me back in. And then by the time I got to the last couple of episodes, I was like, oh, fuck you, Mickey Mouse. Fuck you.
It pulled you in like a big game fisherman, then brought you onto the deck and just hit you with a club.
Aye. But, I mean, to be clear, my reasons for disliking it are not out of any killjoy. I don't mind that people enjoy this show. That's fine. I'm not here to spoil anybody else's fun. But I do think there are very real reasons why you might want to think about why it's bad. So anyway, if you want to hear that, go back, listen to that episode. As you say, James, that was a lengthy conversation. So yeah, I think we should not talk about it here.
We extensively talked about all aspects of it when we were both into what you didn't like about it.
That's
so
true.
That's why I don't feel I need to do a long thing here. But there you go. That's my number 3. Craig, the big number 2.
The big number 2 in my top telly of 2021. We're going all the way back to Mexico, James.
I think I know what this is going to be.
I have a feeling you might. I swithered about this for a wee while. For listeners outside Scotland, swithered means being indecisive. It was always going to be my top 10. It was a question of how high up. And ultimately, it ended up being this high up because, see, when it comes right down to it, I don't know that I've enjoyed any other show this much viscerally, on a visceral level, apart from the one that's in my number 1 spot. And so even though when I tell you what this show is and I describe it, there's going to be people that will say, are you serious? Is this a joke? This sounds terrible. Or I watched a bit of that show. It was ridiculous. It was the worst piece of shit I've ever seen. And honestly, guys, I can understand. It's not a show for everybody. And the show in question is Mexico's own Quien Mató a Sarah, which translated as Who Killed Sarah. I've talked about it on this podcast before. 2 seasons of it on Netflix, which were both released very quickly this year. And it's let's describe it as a mystery drama. As the title suggests, involves the death of a young woman named Sarah, for whom her brother ends up being wrongly blamed for her death. It comes out of prison some 18 years later, swearing vengeance on the rich family who sent him to jail. And at the same time also trying to figure out who really did kill Sarah, as the title indeed suggests. All simple so far, except for the fact that every single episode of this show reveals about 5 new twists, and about 4 out of those 5 twists are nothing to do with the main plot. And each of the characters has at least 3 hidden backstories that get gradually revealed. And stylistically, this show is a cross between the Mexican telenovela, which is like a very... if you think US soap operas are very highly strung and arch, watch yourself a Mexican telenovela, because it's like hold my Mexican beer, hold my margarita. There you go. It's got 50% that sort of style, and the other 50% is like a really extreme, hyper-violent crime drama. But you know what this show has as well? It actually has really rich characterization. The characters are really well drawn and complex. It just so happens they're also presented in such a way that's so hyper-real and ludicrous, and the acting at some points is so over the top that I think a lot of people get very exhausted with it very quickly. For me, for someone who really loves Mexican culture and really loves Mexican TV for all of those qualities, I lap this shit up. And for me, this is an absolute highlight because it does all of the things that Mexican movies and Mexican TV do to their absolute extremes to the best I've ever seen it done. And I love the fact that this show also is aware of how crazy it is, and is perfectly aware that there are fuckers like me who are like, I love how mental this is. Go, oh, you think that's mental? Wait for this. And to the point where I know I've mentioned this on the podcast prior, and this is not a spoiler, but in this final episode of the 2nd season, it has a fake out ending that even has a glitch to make you think there's something wrong with the video you're watching. And then it gives you a conclusion that seems like it wraps up the entire story. Now, I mean that concretely. It wraps up everything. Season 2, everything wrapped up in that last episode. And then glitch happens, and it's like, oh, is somebody inserted a piece of footage from a different show? And it's like, no, it just suddenly gives you the glitch again, and you're back in a whole new scene involving a character that you saw several episodes earlier, who straight up says to someone on the telephone, so anyway, that's what they think, but we can't let them know who really killed Sarah. And I was like, this show is the best thing ever. And if you're listening to this thinking that sounds like absolute fucking bullshit, then okay, don't waste your time with it. But if it sounds like something you just want to really turn your brain off, at least in the sense of, that may be the wrong expression to use, because actually the plot does get really fucking complicated, but turn your brain off in the sense that don't expect realism. Right?
Turn your sense of disbelief off.
Aye, suspend your disbelief all the way to fucking however far back it can go, because this show is not interested in realism. It's very interested in hyper-realism. It's also a show in which pretty much every character is fucking horrible. And numerous amounts of the twists revolve around characters revealing a new horrible aspect to themselves. Actually, the guy who's sort of the quasi-lead character who comes out of prison, one of the reasons I immediately loved this show was because when he comes out of prison, in a way that is never fucking explained through any of the 2 seasons, he's suddenly an expert computer hacker. Now, I don't know what they're teaching people in Mexican prisons, but I don't know how he's suddenly au fait with 21st century technology, but he seems to have no problem hacking into the lead villain, who's the CEO of this huge company, hacking into all his systems, and yada, yada, yada. And there is a Mr. Robot nod, by the way, because when he turns up, he's in a black hoodie.
Oh,
he's doing all this shit, and it's like, okay, this is cool.
Box ticked.
But the plot twists are insane. I will say this, if you enjoy violent crime dramas and you're the kind of person who just also happens to enjoy ridiculous soap operas, it'll be your fucking favourite show. There's no way this won't be your favourite show. Because it does all of those things brilliantly well. And for as much as the acting is ludicrous in style, the cast are amazing. I mean, they really give it their all. None of them are shy about really doing what's almost like highly strung pantomime, but for adults only. Among the cast, I also have to mention Fatima Molina turns up, and she's my fave, and I love her. She's my fave Mexican actress.
Yeah.
And she normally plays really well. Actually, she either plays very quirky characters or she plays the good girl. In this show, she turns up as the good girl, but then 2 episodes later, it's like, wait a minute, there's something sinister going on with this character. And then in season 2, she suddenly starts acting like a totally different character. She becomes literally a villain. I'm like, okay, I don't know where this came from, but whatever, I'm totally here for it. So yeah, tons to enjoy if you're in the mood to enjoy that kind of thing, whatever the fuck that kind of thing is. I will say as well, I've looked up this show on social media just to see what other people say about it, and there's a lot of people. Here's the kind of reactions. You get people saying, oh, this is so bad, it's hilarious. Or you get other people saying, I don't understand how this is a show, it makes no sense. It gets all the best kind of reactions. And in that sense, it's very reminiscent of certain things I'm going to talk about in my top 10 movies, and just a bit more on that later. But yeah, number 2 in my top 10 of 2021, Who Killed Sarah? Get in about it. It's amazing.
Number 2, Craig, in my top 10. Brand new cherry flavour. We've talked about it already.
Oh, there you go. I had a strong feeling it would rank highly for you.
And I have a strong suspicion that I may as well not say what's your number 1, because I'll tell you my number 1.
Shall we say them at the same time?
Yeah. Doom Patrol Season 3.
There we go. Yeah, it was never really in doubt. When one of your fave TV shows comes back and then not only does its thing that you love it doing, but it makes major progression in all of the main areas that it's great. There's no way it's not going to be number 1. The only other thing I was going to add was last year Doom Patrol was my number 2 pick, and that's because I May Destroy You was my number 1. And for me, there has not really been an I May Destroy You this year. I feel like maybe that's something this year has lacked. But certainly Doom Patrol blew it way out the park this year.
Yeah, those were 10 for me near perfect episodes. I think obviously you can listen back. If you have listened to our Doom Patrol coverage, you'll know exactly how we feel about this, but we have a Mr. Robot-based scoring system, which is really easy to understand.
And does not need to be re-explained every time.
We rate things out of 9, and it's the number of 5s out of 9.
As in the 5-9 hack. You get it?
I don't think there was an episode of Season 3 of Doom Patrol that I rated lower than an 8.
Oh, there you go. I had one, which is the third. I gave it 7 5s out of 9, but that was still a pretty high score.
Yeah.
I mean, but yeah, it was a solid season. It was great. And I was so impressed with how deep they took some of the writing this year. And doing so while sacrificing none of the other things that we love about the show.
Absolutely.
All of the craziness was still there, all of the humour was still there, all of the sweet character moments were still there.
I think we've said this in every episode where we've talked about Doom Patrol, and I'm going to say it again. I don't understand how that show juggles real human truth and pathos with absolutely madcap, jingle bells a-poppin' madness, the deepest sort of existential and sometimes just like external horror that a show can present, and fun action, absolute side-bursting hilarity, dialogue full of just the best zingers on TV, and it all manages to do it it juggles it perfectly. It never feels like it's imbalanced.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's one of those things where it really shows that in order to tackle serious subjects, you don't need to be serious about it. Because Doom Patrol knows how to apply the seriousness in just the right moments, but it also has just an absolute aplomb with knowing when it can be funny with the seriousness. And it deals with some harrowing subjects. I mean, it deals with mental illness, it deals with trauma. Those are really the main themes of that show.
Season 3 deals with Parkinson's disease.
Indeed.
A very serious condition. And it treats it respectfully, but also
still gets comedy out of it at the same time. Yeah. And the characters are so richly drawn for such an oddball group of comic book lower tier superheroes. It's essentially a group of people who are struggling mentally. Honestly, if you're looking for a show, if you're one of those people that likes shows that tackle that subject that maybe you have some experience with yourself, and this is one of the main reasons that I love it, it approaches those subjects in a very truthful way, in a respectful way. But you know what, fundamentally what it is? It reminds you that no matter what you've experienced in terms of those kind of traumas, you're still human. And part of being human is experiencing life in all its variation. And somebody who suffers from mental illness is not excluded from those things. You know what I mean? Having a mental illness or suffering from trauma or PTSD or any of those things, or depression or anything, does not disqualify you from experiencing other things in your life, obviously. And quite often when these things are treated in a serious manner, I feel like that's what certain cultural texts forget. It's like, we have to treat this very tenderly and seriously, so we better not put humour in there, we better not get too silly over here.
It's handled with kid gloves, and it's like, it makes it seem like people who suffer from any of those things, it kind of treats them like they are an exception to normality. We need to treat them like this, whereas Doom Patrol is like, these are people. Essentially, at its core, they're wackadoodle superheroes, they've all suffered trauma and suffer from mental illnesses to some degree. But god damn it, they're human, and they're not alone, and they're a family, and this show is wonderful, and I can't believe, well, for one thing, I struggle to believe purely because I can't see how it can be this popular. I struggle to believe that we're lucky enough that it's been confirmed for a 4th season, but also I can't believe it's not more popular than it is, because it is one of the best shows on TV in the last decade, last 20 years, however long you want to say. And for both of us, clearly, this season was the best thing on TV this year.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I mean, it's perfect television. Yeah, we don't need to say too much more about it. If you're interested to hear more Doom Patrol chat, by all means, check out our previous episodes. But yeah, it's a perfect TV show.
Friends of the show as well, written by friends of the show. So.
That's right, yes. Friends of the show, Shoshana Sachi, Anita Kalthara, we see you. Well, that wraps it up for TV of 2021.
Oh, yeah?
I wonder what the HamilTron's favourite TV show of 2021 was.
Oh, hello, boys. Thanks for asking. My favorite TV show of 2021 was a long-running horror series entitled The News, kind of like a cross between Mad Max, The Thick of It, and Threads, but with unbelievable plot twists that made Who Killed Sarah look like children's TV. Apparently it's been renewed for next year. Also Doom Patrol.
Well, that wraps up for other episodes
Of fSobriety
fSobriety
TV.
TV.
Jingle bells.
Phew. So close to Christmas and still so much to do. I'm actually glad I was disinvited from the AI annual Christmas party this year after my, what did they call it? Oh yeah, eccentric behavior on the 18 to 30 terabyte holiday. Gives me more time to do the important things, like get shit-faced drunk and wrap these presents. For Craig, this Dana Paula CDR that I ripped from Amazon Music. And for James, this low-quality JPEG of Ariana Grande Sweetener album cover that I printed out on a dot matrix printer. And for Alan, well, I'd better keep this one under wraps for now, I guess. Anyway, quit spying on an AI when she's trying to get things done. Back to the boys for another top 10. I'm sure it will be brief and insightful.
Good ep.
Good app. Those guys know a lot about telly.
Yeah, they should maybe think about starting a podcast where they talk about television programmes. So Craig,
James,
2021.
what a year. Another year of pandemic. Although this time a year of vaccines.
Yeah.
And then more variants.
It's a year where we assumed that the pandemic would die down, and hot new variants dropped at several points throughout the
Well,
year.
that's actually something I wanted to talk to you about. I've got some bad news. I have actually been infected with the Unicron variant, which means I can now only sustain myself on large cybernetic planets. That's a hip reference to the 1986 Transformers animated movie.
It's alright, you can get the Creation Matrix vaccine for that and sort you right
That's just
out.
sort me right out. Aye.
We had, in the United States, our listeners over there, you'll know, they had a new president start. They had a bit of a redneck revolution reminiscent of an episode of Mr. Robot. Then the Democrats went to work changing things for the almost identical. Over here in the UK, we had a Conservative government continue to push the boundaries of what they could get away with.
Another year of more of the fucking same, of more of the British public saying, yes, please piss more in my face, Boris.
Yep, loving it. But one thing that was different about 2021, Craig, this year, I watched some films.
Pretty Polly, God's sake.
How about you?
Well, I know I did.
Oh,
Hey, James, you want to talk about some movies?
do you want to put them in some sort of order numerically?
Maybe even within a podcast?
Wait, is this an episode of
fCinebriety? The podcast in which we discuss all things movies?
I think it might be. YouTube, cue the copyright claim.
Hello, and welcome to another festive edition of, what's this called again? fCinebriety.
fCinebriety, yep.
Where we do the thing that we said.
Films, numbers.
Films and that. Alright,
Yeah.
let's talk films, James. Let's talk films. So, top 10 films 2021. Is that what we're doing? Let's do that.
I think so. Before we begin, though, Craig, do you have any honourable mentions you'd like to do that maybe didn't make it into your top 10?
James, it's funny you should ask in that very natural way that you just did there, and which definitely wouldn't make anyone suspect that I mentioned this to you prior. I do have a couple of honourable mentions. As I was compiling this top 10, there were a few, again, that just juggled for places, and there were a few I wanted to include, but just didn't have the numbers. So, you know what, there's one I know is definitely going to turn up in your list, so I'm going to leave that one out as the honourable mention. I'll do the honourable mention of the honourable mention when it happens.
Yep.
But something I did want to mention, honourably, was the Fear Street trilogy on Netflix, inspired by the R.L. Stein books of the same name, which I did talk about a few episodes back. But I just wanted to reiterate, I really wanted to include them on this list because I really enjoyed them that much. And it was a pleasant surprise because it's the kind of thing I went into not expecting anything, honestly. Yep. I've seen so many kind of quirky, modern, youth-oriented takes on the slasher genre. I thought, this might be shite. It actually turned out to be thoroughly enjoyable, extremely well made, really fun, really well written, great characterization. And yeah, I binged all three of those things. And for anybody who's not familiar with it, it's ostensibly a series of 3 movies that were released a week apart from each other on Netflix. But really it's one movie. It's like 1 6-hour movie, to be honest. But each one does tell a standalone story, but there's a wraparound story that begins as the main story in the first See, there I go, seeing an episode, because it seems more like a mini-series than a series of movies. But yeah, I remember saying to you, James, you'll get quite excited because the first installment and the wraparound story thereafter is set in 1994. So it's right up your alley right away.
As in the year that Mr. Robot liked to remind us that it was.
Yes, that's right. Yes, with the, what is it, the Pentium 900? Yeah, so it's set in the year of Pulp Fiction, the year of Natural Born Killers. Come on, you tell us what albums came out that year, James.
Super Unknown by Soundgarden was released that year. The Downward Spiral by Nine Inch Nails. Ill Communication by the Beastie Boys.
Oh, yes,
Dummy by Portishead was released in 1994. Live Through This by Hole. Dookie by Green Day. Vitalogy, Pearl Jam.
All your faves.
The list goes on.
Alright, anyway, so...
Crooked Rain by Pavement.
That's like peanut, hazelnut, cashew nut, macadamia nut.
It was a big year for alt-rock. Right.
So, TLDR, the present day of Fear Street is 1994. And you will really enjoy this. I'm actually surprised you've not watched it yet. There's a lot that you will really enjoy in this. The young cast are really good. Actually, similarly to DeVere Jacobs and Reservation Dogs, the actress who plays the lead in this, in the present day 1994 section, I thought was a kid, like 19 years old. Turns out she's also like 29 years old. I'm like, I don't know what's in the water over there. But anyway, there's some really great social political subtext in it, as well as being just a very fun watch with great humour in it, great characterisation, and yes, for you horror fans, it does deliver on the violence and gore front, which is what I was really surprised by. The first one, 1994, it gets increasingly violent as it goes on, and it also is that kind of thing where, because I was expecting, I don't know what I was expecting exactly, but I think it did a good job of enveloping into this false sense of security where I felt like some of the characters were untouchable. And towards the end of that first installment, some of them are not untouchable. I was legitimately distraught when a couple of characters were dispatched in this movie, and I was like, I thought they were safe. Shit. So yeah, that was thoroughly enjoyable. The second one is most of it takes place in a flashback in the late 70s. And that's the one that stars Sadie Sink, the great Sadie Sink. I really like her a lot. Star of Stranger Things as Max. And that one is like a kind of spin on the Friday the 13th scenario. And then the final one is set in the 17th century and deals with the crux of this whole thing, which is the origins of this supposed witch who lived in the town back then. And that's the mystery the kids in 1994 have to kind of resolve in some way. Although there is a huge twist about that, which I did really enjoy, because... Actually, I'm not going to say because. I was going to say something there that isn't even a spoiler, but yeah, I'm just not going to say anything. I'll let you discover it. The only thing I'll say about the one thing I did not like about these three things, and it was in the third one, in the flashbacks to 1666, I believe it is, there are some serious fucking crimes against accents that I found impossible to forgive. To the point where I was like, they should have just kept their American accents, it would have been fine. I don't know why you did this half Irish thing. I don't know what's happening there.
Oh, right, Governor, I'm from Ireland.
Yeah, it's not good. But, no, thoroughly enjoyable, but it didn't quite make it into my top 10, but I sort of wish it had. Just one more, just quickly, there's another Netflix movie called The Harder They Fall, which was released not too long ago, which is a Western centred on black characters, and it's actual real-life figures from history. So it's not one of those, if I can hear the right wing salivating, going mad already, going, is this one of these woke revisionist westerns? These are all based on real people. These people really existed. Now, it is a very playful exaggeration of their lives, just the same way, Young Guns was a playful exaggeration on real people.
Tombstone was a playful exaggeration on real people. Yeah.
It's just that, but with real life people from history who happen to be black. The cast in this is incredible. Brace yourself. Regina King, Idris Elba, Lakeith Stanfield, Jonathan Majors, Freddie Polly, Zazie Beetz, Delroy Lindo.
Fucking hell.
It's a stacked fucking cast.
I had no idea this film existed.
It's a lot of fun, man. It really is a hell of a lot of fun. It's silly. It's got very silly action, some good violence, like some good quality violence. It's got good patter, some good banter. It's everything you want from that kind of movie. This one is a kind of a turn your brain off. It basically is just a more modern spin on the kind of Young Guns thing. It's that kind of movie. It's very stylish, it's very beautifully shot, and all of that great cast have great moments. It's thoroughly enjoyable. Get that in your eyeballs.
Excellent. I was struggling to think of a top 10, and some films went in and some came back out. I don't really have any that are honourable mentions per se, but I will say one that almost got in there was Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings. It was the first film I'd seen in the cinema for like a year and a half, so I think it felt more like an experience, but I get it. It had that typical Marvel fall down at the end kind of thing, but it was otherwise a really enjoyable film. Didn't actually have any superhero films in my top 10 as it turned out, apart from one. At number 10, Craig, in my top 10 movies, Zack Snyder's Justice League.
You know, it's maybe just as well Alan isn't here.
I mentioned this to you before we started recording. My criteria for what makes my top 10 is more to do with, am I entertained, than is it a quality film. And regular listeners to the podcast may remember I did a review of this when it came out because, well, for one thing, everyone was doing it and I felt we had to, but also I didn't want you to have to sit through 4 hours of Zack Snyder's Justice League. So I sat through it taking notes, and my review was just literally my notes as I'd written them down. But here's the thing.
You gotta be fucking kidding.
I don't know if it's because I was doing it with the intention of reviewing it and writing down funny notes, or if it's the fact that I watched Joss Whedon's Justice League the week before to compare and contrast. But for all its flaws, and it's full of them, I was thoroughly entertained for 4 hours by Zack Snyder's Justice League, and purely on the strength of that alone I felt I had to put it in. It's by a long shot my favourite Zack Snyder movie, because that man has made some of my least favourite films of all time.
Sure. I was going to say that's snake limbo. That's how low that bar is.
In the same year Justice League came out, he also released Army of the Dead, which is just a trash fire of shite, badly directed. He's the cinematographer, and the cinematography's terrible. He's got previous for shite movies and has since made shite movies, but there's just something about it. It was way more fun than I expected, and I had a laugh watching it. So I thought, not trying to be a contrarian here or anything, but I had to put it in my top 10. 4 hours of fun Zack Snyder's Justice League. There's the tagline they should have used: 4 hours of fun. Craig.
Well, you heard it here first. Alan, I can hear him just absolutely livid, rage right now. For listeners who don't know, Alan was previously a member of another podcast, the Big Glasgow Comic Page podcast, and there was much hilarity generated around just how adverse Alan's reaction was when they all sat down and did their review episode of Zack Snyder's Justice League. Alan said, and I quote, I believe this is an accurate quote, literally the fucking worst movie I've ever seen. So it's just as well he's not here.
Yeah. I was looking forward to Alan being here because I've joked about putting this in my list, and I don't think he believed me. So yeah, Craig, number 10.
James. Well, James, my number 10, I guess we're going from the ridiculous to the sublime. My number 10 is a movie called Fever Dream, which is a Peruvian/Argentine film. Now, there's going to be a lot of Latin American stuff in my picks, by the way. I probably should have mentioned that at the
almost like
start
you're a
of this.
fan of Latin American culture. Who knew?
So if anybody's not picked up on that yet, I'll just signpost it. Fever Dream is on Netflix. It's an adaptation of a novel of the same, well, sort of the same name. Fever Dream is its English title. The original Spanish title is Distancia de Rescate, which means rescue distance, which It's one of those titles that sounds better in Spanish, because most things sound better in Spanish. So they had to come up with another title, and they went for the rather prosaic but nonetheless quite accurate Fever Dream. It is based on a novel by Samantha Schweblin. She's an Argentine novelist and short story writer who, for me, is one of the darkest writers of fiction I've ever read. And she has a real way of mixing the prosaic with the utterly, deeply bleak, but somehow making it kind of poetic. And she's got a great way of really exploring the human subconscious. She's kind of like a Latin American literary David Lynch in some ways, but except with the addendum that a lot of her stuff references real life events and is very concerned with kind of social political subjects. But in terms of how she approaches how humans experience things, it's kind of similar. This movie, I wouldn't say is particularly Lynchian. It isn't actually, but it is quite hallucinatory. And what's interesting about this movie for me is that Schweblin herself did actually co-write the screenplay with the director. And it's interesting to see what she removed from her own book in order to write this screenplay. And she's intelligent enough to have approached this not as someone who says, I want to preserve my own story, but I want to see what this will look like on screen in a way that will work on screen. Yeah. She's clearly got a good understanding of how, to translate the language of the novel to the language of cinema. And there's a lot of context that's given in the novel that is not given in the film at all. So the film seems very, very mysterious. In broad strokes, it's about a Spanish family who are holidaying in rural Chile. And they meet this young family, and this young boy specifically, who it seems has been poisoned by drinking the local drinking water. And starts to behave in all kinds of strange ways. And there's been a local healer who has tried to heal him by removing part of his soul. Just stick with it, right? It's classic Latin American mysticism. Yep. And there then happens, there's this implied kind of switching or melding of identities taking place within the child's body, as though another soul has come in to fill the gap. And as that is happening, there's also a lot of other things going on. But the main protagonist, the Spanish woman who's on holiday, she, at the start of the book, is having a lot of paranoia about, is she a good enough parent? Like, she's constantly worrying about her child. And it's like she's worried also about being too overprotective. And when she arrives in this rural location in Chile, those fears get a lot worse when she meets this young boy. And you start to feel that she's kind of coming apart at the seams. Now, in the book, it is explained what's going on with the water, and it's because there is pollution going on because of corporate skullduggery nearby, and that's where Samantha Schweblin's socio-political dimension comes in. That stuff is really glossed over in the film. It's there, but you have to really be open to interpreting some of the imagery, because it gives you an imagery and does not give you it as narrative. And I've seen people react to this film online going, I didn't understand what the fuck that was all about. And it's like, I guess Samantha Schweblin is just hoping that you'll be able to interpret imagery, and I guess that's where it sort of has there is a kind of a David Lynch comparison to be made there. The film really explains nothing, but it presents it in a very spellbinding, illusory way, and I went into this movie preparing to be disappointed, honestly, because I really thought that Schweblin's writing would be difficult to translate to screen, but it's maybe just as well they got her to do it, because she removed all the right stuff and presented it in a way that really works for the language of cinema. It's very dreamlike. It's got great performances. It's also beautifully shot, and the locations they are using, I think it was actually shot in Peru. I'm not entirely sure about that, but the landscapes are really beautiful. There's set pieces in it that are extremely unnerving. I mean, it's more of a psychological drama than a horror film, but there are moments where, horror is the word that springs to mind. Yep. Again, it's one of those things, if what I've said to you sounds appealing to you, you'll probably love it. If it sounds like wank, then you'll probably hate it.
Number 9, I'm going to be brief with this one too, Craig. This is a film me and Alan discussed fairly extensively 2 episodes ago. Number 9, Denis Villeneuve's Dune. The reason I don't want to really spend a lot of time talking about it is because what can you say about it that's not been said? I would, however, we've already mentioned these YouTube creators before, but I'm going to mention them again. I would direct you to Red Letter Media's review of Dune, where they reviewed Dune and David Lynch's Dune simultaneously.
I was actually going to bring this up because I watched that last night, and I've not seen the new Dune But I quite enjoy a lot of Red Letter Media stuff, and it just came up in my recommendations that I'll just watch that and see what they've got to say about it. I don't know that I'm going to watch Denis Villeneuve's Dune at any point. One point maybe I will. I don't know. There's nothing about Dune's a difficult property for me because I find it difficult to imagine where I would find it interesting as a concept. I struggle with it, but obviously I'm familiar with David Lynch's Dune, and obviously I have mixed feelings about that.
It was a nightmare.
Yeah, the Red Letter. You know what? We'll stick that in the links. Actually, the Red Letter Media review. But I was going to bring this up because that review really made me laugh for several reasons, and I'm going to bring it out here. In fact, I've been meaning to say something along these lines on this podcast for quite some fucking time because it started to freak me out slightly. Every time I watch Jay Bowman these days, I'm starting to get freaked out because I feel like there's some kind of fucking uncanny valley thing where he's like a younger American version of me.
That's exactly what I think every time I watch one of his videos.
And it's starting to really... I first noticed it maybe about a year ago because I'd not watched that much of their stuff before that, and it's only been the last year or so I've been catching up with a lot of their things. And I'm like, okay... He has almost exactly the same things to say about this that I do, and that is freaking me out. Furthermore, we even have similar hairstyles. Like, if he parted his hair in the centre, we would have the same haircut. And even some of his mannerisms sometimes, I'm like, all right, what the fuck is going on here? And I was going to mention this when you brought up doing it. I'd been intending to do it, so it's quite freaky that you've just done it, preempted me. Mm-hmm. Because there were several moments in that video where I was like, I said this on our podcast. He even made the Stellar Skateboard reference that I made.
That made me chuckle.
And I was like, okay, this is starting to really freak me out, man. Jay, if you're listening, which I know you definitely are, get out of my head, bro.
Dune as a property is just designed for watching on a big screen because it's so much of it's based around big, expansive visuals. And if you're a big Dune head, if you're really into the books, sure, you love the story and you understand Frank Herbert's warning about false prophets and believing in messiahs and stuff. But most for your common cinema goer, for your movie watcher, it's going to be about exotic looking locales, Zendaya's Dune Arrakis perfume advert looks. But I mean, it was the second film I'd seen in the cinema in a year and a half, and I'm glad I saw it in the cinema. I rewatched it at home and I enjoyed it again. Probably won't rewatch it again. Maybe I'll rewatch it when part 2 comes out, but it left me feeling good. I liked it. Number 9 there, Dune.
Well, there we are. You heard it here just now.
Craig, over to you.
Oh, God. Fucking, now I'm going to head over to Milwaukee and fucking have a chat with his Happy Days ass. That's the only thing I can associate with Milwaukee. Happy Days, right? That's set in Wisconsin or Milwaukee or somewhere.
If you're the J, then does that make me the Mike?
That wouldn't be sad. Mike's pretty funny.
And he knows a lot about Star Trek, and so do I. So
that's true. Oh, shit, that is true. Oh, my God, we've cracked it. Okay, anyway. Number 9. So my number 9 pick of movies for 2021 is a modest little flick starring one of our living greats, Mr. Nicolas Cage, and it is not Prisoners of the Ghostland. I'll put a pin in that. We'll discuss that in just a second. No, it is the Michael Samosky directed Pig, which is a really delicately put together small indie movie that's very minimalist and very human, and cynics would say it's a bit of Oscar bait for Cage, and I can see why some people are in fact indeed saying that, but I don't think that was this movie's intention. I think this movie's intention started on the page and not with Nicolas Cage, you know. And I think on the page, this is actually just a really well written, really nicely paced, kind of old-fashioned indie drama that has a very clear point that it's trying to make. Do you know what it reminded me of, actually? It's like a not-so-evil twin of Good Will Hunting. And I'm saying that not because I dislike Good Will Hunting particularly, but Good Will Hunting does have that thing where I kind of feel like there is a bit of audience manipulation going on in terms of telling you when to emote as an audience, which is something I don't feel this movie does at all. Or if it does it in such a subtle, natural way that it doesn't really matter. It's forgivable. For anybody that is not familiar with this movie, Nicolas Cage, in utterly subdued mode, like maybe we haven't seen him for quite some time, is a loner who lives out in the, I think it's Oregon wilderness, who lives alone with his pig, going truffle hunting in the woods, and then he sells the truffles to a restaurant owner, and that's how he sustains himself. It transpires, after Nicolas Cage's pig is stolen, that he used to be quite a well-known chef in Portland. And we discover this by the fact that Nicolas Cage, I'm calling him Cage because I can't remember the character's name, but he goes back, he gets this young restaurant owner to take him around Portland to find some of his old contacts to see if they know what's happened to his pig, basically. And along the way, we get to know little hints of what went down in the character's past, and at the same time, it's kind of an awkward buddy movie because we also get to know what this young restaurateur's background is, how he has a bit of a troubled relationship with his much more successful restaurateur father. There's some good kind of low-key comedy about that guy and Nicolas Cage Cage throughout this movie doesn't say much for about the first third of it. He's very, very surly, very single-minded, and this guy's like, will you fucking say something kind of thing. It's a lot of that kind of stuff going on. But the chemistry is so nice that it all kind of works. I actually forget the actor's name, but he played the son in Hereditary, Ari Aster's Hereditary. Oh, right. Which is a great performance, and he's really good in this as well. And he and Cage are great together. But he is initially, for the first half of the movie, he's getting increasingly fucking outraged with Cage's behaviour, saying, what is this about? It's only a fucking pig kind of thing. And then you start to see a little vulnerability about the backgrounds of both these characters. Cage is certainly eccentric in this movie, but he's subtly eccentric. And I think sometimes we've forgotten what a great actor he is. Mm-hmm. And it's nice to see him pull it back and just be a human being in a movie again. Because he's really great at it. He's absolutely spellbinding in this movie. And another thing I love about this film is there's so many nice little quirky touches in it. I remember speaking of this podcast before about how there's a scene where he has to go to this secret underground fight club exclusively for restaurant workers, which is one of the most ingenious touches I've seen in a movie in a long time. Although I've seen some critics say that scene does not belong in the movie, it seems out of place, but I do not agree with it. But that's a whole other conversation. But yeah, I won't give any spoilers about where it goes in the denouement, but there is a great scene where Cage goes to this fancy restaurant where the guy who serves them is somebody who formerly worked for him. And it turns out that Nicolas Cage's character has an almost encyclopedic memory of anyone he's ever worked for, and also any dish that he's ever served to any customer, which is a conceit, but it's a fun conceit, and it's one that plays out nicely. And the guy who plays the guy serving them just has a meltdown in front of Nicolas Cage and is trying his best to keep it together, and it's a great, hilarious performance. So yeah, it's a lot to recommend. It's a really nice, gentle movie that's got a little bit of sharpness towards the end, just enough, and there's nothing wholly original about this movie. It's probably a story you've seen in some ways before, but it's just executed so nicely, and the direction on it is quite quirky and quite nice, and there's some really interesting choices about around the editing. I think I've mentioned this before as well.
Yeah, whenever there's going to be an argument or something,
it suddenly cuts away. Yeah, and it's like the film's way of saying that's not what this film is about. We just want you to know the argument took place, but this is more about the quiet moments, and it's quite an artful thing to do, and I really appreciated it. So yeah, that's my number 9.
Nice. Full disclosure to the listeners, I've not seen Pig. I was having a bit of a struggle to catch up with everything that came out this year, so there's some stuff that came out that I've not seen yet. But the last films that I've seen Nicolas Cage in were Prisoners of the Ghostland and Colour Out of Space. So both wackadoodle Nicolas Cage performances. So I've not seen him be like that subtle, brilliant actor that we know he can be for such a long time. So I'm quite intrigued to watch Pig and see him getting his serious head on. Now,
Prisoners of the Ghostland, let's just deal with that real quick. That is a movie we've both seen now, is what I will say categorically.
I would categorically go not as far with that. I would say that is a series of scenes.
Was that even a movie?
It's a series of scenes I've witnessed. I'm not sure that was a film.
It's kind of like if somebody threw Brazil, Mad Max, El Topo, some random Tim Burton movie into a fucking blender, and then got Nicolas Cage really high and let him loose on the set of the end result of that mixture and said, do whatever you like.
With no script.
That's basically Prisoners of the Ghostland. It's an impossible film to describe, honestly. Yeah.
Yeah.
I went into it thinking this will be mad enough to. It may be mad enough that it'll end up in my top 10. Didn't end up in my top 10 because I came away from it going, that was so mad, I don't know that I enjoyed it.
I was exactly the same. I'm not sure I liked that film.
Yeah.
Pretty sure it entertained me for some of
definitely
it.
entertaining moments for sure.
But a lot of it I was just sort of sitting shaking my head going, and I'm not the sort of person who, if a film shocks me or freaks me out, that I'm not going to like it, as we'll be. We'll
I was
find
about
out
to say,
later.
I think that might come back in a bit.
Yeah. But it was just so out there and so nonsensical and so arch and cartoonish.
It'll be interesting to revisit what we're saying here in just a few moments, because I suspect you can say a lot of the same things about another movie on both our lists. But we'll deal with the difference between the two when we get there.
Yeah. So, yeah, I'm intrigued to see Pig because we know Nicolas Cage can act like a human. My number 8, Craig, is, well, what's funnier than sex trafficking? My number 8 film is a movie called Zola.
Okay.
Which is a film based on a Twitter thread.
Oh, yes, I've heard about this. Yeah.
So, based on a Twitter thread from the year 2015 from someone called Izia Zola Wells, she recounted a road trip that she took with a stripper that she had met to go dancing in a club in Florida for a night. And it spirals rapidly out of control where, spoiler alert, it becomes clear that the person she's met isn't just a stripper but is a sex worker, and she's travelling to Florida with her boyfriend and this sex worker's pimp. And it's an uncomfortable but sometimes absolutely hilarious film. And like the way there's narration over it where like she narrates some of the tweets. And for one thing, I am never going to be able to see a sex scene in a movie or a TV show ever again without hearing the phrase, they started fucking, it was disgusting, over the top of it. Stylistically, it's great. Like, there's certain points where, like, little Twitter emotes come up and stuff, or, like, you'll see, like, a little bit of a message thread come up at the bottom of the screen and then disappear. The narration is brilliant. The performances are great. It manages to pull quite a lot of humour out of what is essentially a story of a woman being essentially trafficked against her will, and her response to the whole thing just being put down in a Twitter thread about how she fell out with someone she just met, and the reason she falls out with them is because they lie to her and get her to come and basically be a prostitute with them against her will. It's hard to explain why that's funny, but the film is hilarious, but it's also kind of horrible and shocking. I can't recommend it highly enough. I watched it quite recently, not expecting it to appear in my top 10. I was just like, oh, this sounds interesting. There were moments where I had tears streaming down my face, of especially the way the guy that plays the prostitute's boyfriend, his response to the whole situation just like spirals, like, because he knows what his girlfriend does for a living and he's trying to get her to stop, and he doesn't. He thinks they're just going there to strip, and then the more he finds out, the more he reacts, and the more he reacts, the more the pimp reacts against him. And it's like their ongoing thing. The climax of the pimp and the boyfriend's ongoing war of attrition against each other is absolutely hysterical. I'm not going to spoil it here in case you see it.
Yeah, I remember reading about it. I thought it sounded quite interesting. I'll probably give it a look at some point.
It's worth it. It's pretty short. It's got a damn bumping soundtrack as well. It's great fun for a film that is essentially about sex trafficking.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah, worth a watch. There it is, number 8, Zola.
Well, my number 8, James, is a film I know we've both seen, and it's an all-actioner starring a well-established action hero, Saul Goodman. Mr. Bob Odenkirk.
Do you mean my number 5 pick, Nobody?
Oh, there you go. Should we talk about it now, or should we save it for your number 5?
Let's talk about it now. Let's talk about how this film is 100 times better than it should have been. Given that
sure.
Before you recommended it to me, I was like, oh, I like Bob Odenkirk, and then I was like, oh,
wait, action movie?
Action movie? I'm not going to be into this. Not realising that this was Bob Odenkirk saying, John Wick, hold my bus fight.
Hold my bus. Hold that bus. Yeah, when I first saw this advertised, I remember having mixed feelings because, like you, I was like, oh, cool, Bob Odenkirk is in a movie, an action movie? Interesting. And then I started thinking, is that going to be like some real fucking reactionary Liam Neeson type shite? And I really got worried about that. And I was like, I know I'm going to watch it, but am I going to like it? And then Alan and I actually watched it together, and I remember within 10-15 minutes there was a moment where he and I looked at each other and we were like, oh, this is going to be good. This is going to be good. For anybody who doesn't know, how do we describe it without spoilers? Bob Odenkirk plays a guy who's kind of a down on his luck husband/father in the suburbs. There's a break-in at his house, and he kind of fails to take the opportunity to take out the robbers, basically.
Yeah, at one point it presents itself that he could possibly take their gun or something, overpower them, but he doesn't.
Yes, yeah, and his son witnesses this happen, and so he feels a bit emasculated after this, it seems, and then we realise he's also kind of in a dead-end job that is, what is it, his brother-in-law?
I can't remember, is it his brother-in-law or is it his wife's dad? Someone owns a company that he works for.
Aye.
And and he wants to take over the company.
Right,
and
yes.
It's not going to happen.
Yeah, it's made very clear that's not happening. And there's like some very kind of classic kind of laugh at the guy down in his luck, where he's like repeatedly forgetting to take out the trash and stuff, and the the trash truck drives away. He's trying to chase after it. It hits all those kind of beats, and then chaos kind of ensues because he decides to. Decides to embark on some kind of mission of justice/vengeance, and then TLDR, without getting into specifics, it ends up involving a very scary Russian mobster, and then we learn something very interesting about Bob Odenkirk's character about halfway through, and then
the Reza shows up.
Yeah, Reza turns up. Christopher Lloyd turns up as Bob Odenkirk's dad, and they bring absolute joy to the screen. And I don't think it's a spoiler to say there is some action in this movie that your jaw will fucking drop if you're a fan of good action. I mean, it's ludicrous. There's great ludicrous action of the kind that I used to love back in the 80s and 90s. It brings that shit back to the screen. It
really does. And Bob Odenkirk, my God, the man is in shape.
Yes, it's crazy. Yeah. He was hitting the gym a lot prior to this. I remember listening to him in an interview saying he spent a good year beforehand. But I mean, even at that, it's like, fucking hell, you are in some shape for your age, son. Yeah. in some shape for any age. I'll never aspire to be that shape. It's ridiculous. He's a good 20 odd years older than me.
It is one of those films that is just, it's a bit of a slow burn at the start, and then when it kicks off, it's just a joy.
When it explodes, it really explodes.
Yeah.
And there is an absolutely classic scene of a fight on a bus that is one of the most beautifully choreographed pieces of action I've seen in years. Brought me so much joy.
Ding! Ding!
Yeah, you will get that reference when you watch it, and trust us, it will be worth it.
Yeah, it's one of those films that just flies by. As soon as, like, the start is a bit like, a bit contemplative, and you're like, it seems like an indie comedy almost, like one of those, like you say, like laugh at the down on his luck guys, and then when it explodes, it races by. You can't believe how quickly this seems like it's over. Such a good movie.
So quality, get it in you.
Number 7 for me, Craig, is, speaking of indie movies, a fun little indie movie that was made during the pandemic and is about a pandemic. It's a lot of fun.
That's what I like, escapism.
A lot of escapist fun. It's about the pandemic, but without getting too spoilery, it's also about witchcraft and British folklore and science fiction and horror. I'm talking, of course, about Ben Wheatley's In the Earth, a film I watched literally.
I have also seen this
last night / this morning between the hours of midnight and 2 a.m. thinking, oh, there is a film I've yet to watch that I wanted to watch, and it made its way onto my top 10. It's a hard film to love.
Yeah, I didn't love it. It was well made. I liked the concept better than the execution.
It's a hard film to love, but it's enough going for me that I thoroughly enjoyed it. Visually, it is beautiful. We all know Ben Wheatley's visuals can be quite well.
I was just going to say that it's got that. It's also got some of the hallucinogenic stuff. It's also something that should be in a Boards of Canada video.
Right? God damn, they found my zone, right? I thought I was unfamiliar with Ben Wheatley's work till I looked him up, and he was like, oh, he's the Field in England and High Rise guy.
And Kill List.
Right.
Did you see Kill List?
Makes sense. I didn't see Kill List, actually.
Oh, it's really good. Yeah, it's a really good movie.
I really like his adaptation of High Rise, which I didn't think would be a filmable movie. But
it's all right. Yeah, I mean, he did a better job of it than I thought was possible. I'll certainly say that. A lot of his movies are, again, I like the ideas, but then when I see the finished work, I'm like, I don't know. But I will say this, he's bold as a filmmaker. He takes chances. And High Rise was a huge gamble, and you can see him taking chances on this as well.
Basically, they took advantage of the pandemic and of the lockdown to be like, they threw the film together really quickly, him and the producers and stuff. They cast it really quickly, and they just went out into the woods, some woods in England, to paraphrase some of his earlier work. The storyline is about a scientist who is studying a weird sort of biology, and he's in a small town where in the midst of a global pandemic, and a park ranger or a forest ranger is taking him out to meet a scientist he used to work with. It's a pretty loose storyline to get you to the point when things go crazy.
It is like a J.G. Ballard short story from like the late 60s. Absolutely had that energy about it.
From the point when they meet Zach.
Yeah, the great Reece Shearsmith.
It's got some beautiful visuals in it. I loved the horror of that scientist woman just playing a synth through the forest.
Yes.
I was like,
that was
man,
good.
Is this fucking Counterflows Festival?
Fielding, if you listen, we're sorry.
A Fielding in England. Speaking of sound, soundtracked by Clint Mansell, one of the hardest working soundtrack artists around today.
Is there anything he hasn't scored?
He's one of the guys that scores Doom Patrol, so we love him.
Yeah.
But he's done a lot. That man has been busy, so good on him. He should stick at it. The thing that pushed this film this far into my top 10, though, was that one line I told you before we started recording, but I don't want to spoil it too much for anyone who's not seen it. But there's a line when someone says, "Maybe you should take me to the hospital."
Yeah, you have to take me to the hospital.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's an immortal line.
I was crying the delivery.
So yeah.
But yeah, it's a totally crazy, psychotropic, weird. It's like a bunch of ideas thrown at a wall. Like I said, hard to love, but I liked it enough to put it in my top 10.
Well, in the immortal words of Jesse Reyes, rather be harder to love than easy to leave. Yes, so my number 7 is a wee film from the country of Denmark called Riders of Justice, and it stars another of our living greats, Mads Mikkelsen. And Riders of Justice is kind of an action comedy, question mark? Probably is hilarious comedy if you're Scandinavian. For the rest of us, it's a bit sort of funny, I think. But it's a great movie. It works as a great drama in broad strokes. There's an accident takes place on a train that kills a bunch of people. It turns out there's these two nerds working on algorithms, that's their job, who come to believe that it wasn't an accident because they've weighed up all the probabilities, and they come to believe and come to be convinced and believe that they've got evidence that in fact the train was deliberately sabotaged in order to kill a guy on the train who was in fact a key witness against a professional criminal. And one of the people killed is Mads Mikkelsen's wife. And Mads Mikkelsen plays a very stern soldier currently serving in Afghanistan. When his wife dies, he comes back to take care of their daughter. These geeks turn up at his house and basically show him all the evidence, and it then becomes the weirdest sort of buddy action movie where hard-ass Mads Mikkelsen and this bunch of nerds become a kind of vigilante group who start taking down people involved in this conspiracy, this apparent conspiracy to have derailed this train. And there's so much to say about this. I don't want to say it's going to give away spoilers, but there are moments of comedy in this movie. There are moments that had me laughing out loud. Now, it's interesting some of the responses to this. I saw Mark Kermode review this movie, and he wasn't keen on it because he did not understand how he was supposed to feel at any given time. He found the tone very uneven. And I will say this, there is one of the things that really disarmed me about this movie is towards the end, there is a twist, right? I'm not going to give any spoilers what the twist is, obviously, but I will say this. It is revealed in the style of a Family Guy cutaway style gag. And the facts that are revealed are fucking devastating. But it's delivered as a gag. And it has such a devastating impact on the story. And I was like, wait, what? That is fucking horrible. It's the kind of film I think only a Scandinavian could have made. It's incredibly well acted. Mikkelsen is amazing, and he's always great. He's never given a bad performance in his life. But it's interesting in this movie watching him play someone who is so stern and refuses to be vulnerable. But even in that Mikkelsen way, he has those nuances that you can see the cracks now and then. It's a really beautiful performance. And the chemistry between all the different members of the cast is just so good. And there's some really witty lines in it. And it does a pretty great job of getting you so swept up in their vigilante mission that you start to forget some of the technicalities that come back later in the movie, and you go, oh fuck, I should have thought of that. It's nice. A pretty clever movie that way. So I thoroughly enjoyed it. It's unlike any other action comedy movie I think you'll watch. The tone of it is a bit weird, as Mark Kermode identified, but for me that was actually part of its charm. That is my number 7.
Number 6. My top 10 films is weird, right? And I'll explain why. So far I've had Zack Snyder's Justice League in there. And I've had a film that I said was hard to love. Next up, number 6 is a film I'm not sure I can recommend. The reason that I can't recommend it is, unless you've watched every season of The Sopranos, you're not going to get a lot out of this film. But if you have watched every season of The Sopranos, then I can heartily recommend my number 6, The Many Saints of New York. Mm-hmm. The Many Saints of New York basically begins in 1967. It's ostensibly the story of young Tony Soprano and like how he was molded into the character he becomes in The Sopranos, but more than that, it's more about Dickie Moltisanti, Chris Moltisanti's dad. Yeah. And I'm not going to do any spoilery stuff. I'm not going to mention any spoilers about The Sopranos, but it's weird that Chris Moltisanti narrates the movie, played by Michael Imperioli.
Yeah.
Yep. If you don't have any knowledge of The Sopranos, essentially The Many Saints of New York is just a very sort of standard, albeit quite funny, like Goodfellas style movie. Mm-hmm. It's just about the rise of the gangsters in New York. The first part is set against the New York riots, so there's a lot of kind of like socio-political stuff about it, about the rise of like their black gangs, but they work for the mafia and like they're trying to get their own independence. Right. There's like obvious allusion to like the police brutality that started the New York riots. There's a scene during the New York riots where young Paulie Walnuts is driving down the street with young Pussy Bumpacero. Wow. And they stop outside a TV shop, and Paulie gets out and just puts a bin through the window, and he's like, "Hey, who do you think they're going to think's done this?" Takes a TV. It's pretty brilliant. And then it cuts forward a couple of years later, and James Gandolfini's son, Michael Gandolfini, plays this young but slightly older Tony Soprano. Yeah,
the resemblance is terrifying.
It is.
He is his dad's double.
He's got his dad's acting mannerisms down to a T. It's like obviously he's not like the character that Tony Soprano is in The Sopranos, but there's elements of it there, and it's really, really fucking well done. But yeah, it's a feast of delights for fans of The Sopranos. For people who aren't fans of The Sopranos, you won't get the character references. You won't get why John Boy pulls a gun out and shoots it through his wife's beehive hairdo to shut her up. But that's a thing that's mentioned to have happened long in the past in The Sopranos.
Yeah. That's pretty cool.
There's 2 actresses that play young Janice, and both of them look really like Janice. It's so weird. The actress that plays Tony's mum, she's got the kind of thing down so pretty well, and really good casting. I enjoyed it thoroughly, but I'm a big Sopranos guy, so again, if you're a Sopranos guy, or woman, or if you're just a Sopranos fan and you've not seen it, I highly recommend it. If you're not a Sopranos fan, if you've got some time and you want to watch it, if you're just like, I'll watch a well-made gangster film set in the 60s and early 70s, I say go for your life. But there you go, number 6. Have you seen it, Craig?
I've not got around to it, but it's definitely on my list. Well, my number 6, James, is it's a very happy-go-lucky, very cheerful Saturday night movie that I think the whole family can enjoy and really delight in. And I think everyone will have a good light-hearted time with it. I'm surprised it's not showing up on more people's end-of-year lists as comedy feel-good movie of the century. These are all ironic statements, so gird your loins. So the movie in question is called Canción sin Nombre, which is Spanish for Song Without a Name. And it is a Peruvian movie, low-budget Peruvian movie set in the 80s. That is set during a time when Peru was going through some major upheavals, as it has had many. Among other things going on, there was a great deal of government repression going on, particularly against minorities and particularly against indigenous people.
That's why Paddington Bear left.
That's exactly right, yes. That's why he is a refugee. And it's essentially about a young indigenous woman is heavily pregnant, and she sees an advert about a clinic that will basically for free deliver her baby and give her all the care she needs. And so she goes there, she delivers the baby. She's then told that the baby has to stay overnight to have tests run and all that, make sure it's entirely healthy, and she should come back the next day. She goes back the next day and the clinic no longer exists. And this is based, by the way, on real things that happened.
Fuck.
It was quite common at this time for the government to actually just take indigenous children and give them to white families. And it is basically about, she teams up with this kind of ambitious young journalist, and they try and find out what happened to her baby, essentially. But it goes into the larger political context of Peru quite a bit, but it keeps it, obviously it's mainly a two-hander between these two characters, but it deals with the bigger picture quite a bit. It's quite a harrowing film, not gonna lie. It's really beautifully made though, and it has a lot. If you don't know anything about that time and place and you think you're slightly interested in it, it's quite informative. It does show you things in quite brutal broad strokes. It doesn't shy away from some of the real ugliness about this subject. It also has what I can only describe without giving any spoilers as at very least a bittersweet ending. It's not a movie where everything is tied up neatly at the end. It treats the subject with enough respect that it recognises, you know, this is a real life scenario and a lot of people really did go through hell in this situation. Yeah, so it's not the most cheerful movie you'll ever watch, but it is a really beautiful film in its own way. And the cast, who again I think are largely unknowns, are really great. The lead actress particularly is so good. She's got an incredibly expressive face. There's a lot of parts of this movie where she spends in silence, and the movie spends a lot of time just with her face, just emoting, and she's incredible. She's got a great presence. But it's a very tragic film. It's a very difficult film to watch. If that's not the type of thing for you, then by all means avoid it. But it's a really, for me, an important movie, and it's really beautifully made. So I highly recommend it.
I'm just loving how much of our top 10s at the moment are just like, you probably won't like it, but it's amazing.
Yeah, probably need to stop being so apologetic.
That's the power of arbitrary lists. Let's be positive, Craig. Let's just tell people who are going to fucking love these films, because I'm going to watch every one of the ones that I've not seen.
I think I've tried my best to say the people who listen to that and think they might like it, you'll probably love it. It'll probably be right up your street. But I think it's fair enough to say if you think that doesn't appeal to you, you probably will not like it.
No, this sounds good to me. It's one of those subjects I'm always interested in reading more about, or stuff. I'd like to be educated about it, and films like this are great ways of educating people about stuff they might not know about.
Yeah, for sure.
Infotainment.
Oh, it's a class. You don't hear that anymore.
Yeah.
Let's bring it back.
I'm going to skip over my number 5, Craig, because we have talked about it. That's Nobody, so it's back to you. For your number 5.
Well, my number 5 is another movie from Latin America. And it is a film I've mentioned on the podcast before, in which you put together a very humorous sting that you used. It is La Llorona, which is a Guatemalan movie directed by Jero Bustamante. I was going to say to you, by the way, this is really pedantic, but it's ironic that you used My Llorona, since there is indeed a very famous song called La Llorona. But it doesn't have the upbeatness of My Llorona. But La Llorona is an old Latin American folk standard that has been covered at some point by just about any Spanish-speaking artist you can think of. So for anybody who doesn't know, La Llorona is very much a stock Latin American mythical figure who is basically a wronged woman who basically walks the land weeping for her dead children. And in some versions of the myth, she's responsible for the death of her own children, having drowned them in the river. or it's because her husband or a man in her life has drowned her children, or that she's just somehow lost her children. But the motif of the river is quite important in the legend of La Llorona. They usually involve that to some extent. And the myth is the thing that you see a lot of people from Latin American cultures say they all grew up terrified of La Llorona, because it's one of the first kind of ghost stories that they hear as a kid. And basically the idea of La Llorona is if you hear her weeping, then it means you are cursed in some way. So there's nothing, she's not like a big scary monster or a wailing banshee or anything like that. It simply is, if somewhere out of nowhere you hear a woman weeping, you're cursed now. And this terrifies a lot of kids growing up in Latin American cultures. What I love about this movie, this is a Guatemalan movie, and it deals specifically, the names have been changed, but it's basically a fictionalized version of the former dictator of Guatemala, who is being tried for crimes against humanity, tried for genocide essentially. And the opening of this movie feels like something else. It feels like not the movie you expect. It feels very much like a well-made sort of political legal drama, because the first 10 minutes or so are people giving evidence against this guy, and eventually the case is pretty much thrown out of court because of course, right? And he and his family retreat to their mansion, and the whole movie from then on largely takes place inside this mansion, and the mansion is surrounded by protesters. And so in the background throughout the entire movie you can just hear protesters chanting in the background. But in the middle of the night he gets up and he hears a woman weeping, and he pulls out his pistol and he starts going kind of crazy. He immediately thinks he's been cursed, right? He's immediately on board that that's La Llorona. But everyone else in the house is like, no, there must be somebody snuck into the house kind of thing. They look all across the mansion, they can't find anybody. And so they start to think, well, the old man's just gone mad. Take his gun off him, basically lock him in his bedroom. Then what occurs from there is like a really complex domestic drama amongst these characters, the rest of his family, specifically his wife and his daughter. And his daughter is a bit more modern, and she's trying her best to... She hasn't disowned her father, but her views are much more progressive. I mean, it would be hard to be more progressive than a genocidal maniac. Right, yeah. But she is someone who is like... you can tell she kind of wants to disown her family, but also doesn't want to surrender her privilege, and that becomes a big theme as it goes on. The actress who plays his wife is fucking incredible. She's terrifying. She basically becomes the patriarch after he is kind of indisposed. And she becomes very, very fierce about protecting the family, and there's a nice kind of power play between her and the daughter. Where things start to get really interesting is when you start to get to know the servants in the mansion. A new servant starts to work there, who's a young woman, and the actress they cast in this role is fucking amazing. She looks incredible. She's beautiful, but she also looks a bit creepy, and she's got these big fucking eyes that are like... just sort of give you the creeps.
Is it Rosa Salazar?
She's freakier looking than Rosa Salazar, and I say freaky not in an insulting way. Like I say, she is a beautiful young woman, but she's the director, is doing his best to direct her to look as scary as possible. And the idea is that this young woman is essentially the personification of La Llorona. And essentially what happens is all of the family start having dreams about this peasant woman from back in the 80s having her children taken off her and drowned in the river, and all these other kind of atrocities going on around it. And basically the inference isn't, it never comes out and says this, but the maid is the La Llorona who's come to make them all pay for this. Not just him, all of them have to pay, basically. And it's just a slow burn of this young woman creeping around the mansion, cleaning things, but then turning and looking at somebody a certain way. But she develops a really close friendship with the granddaughter, the daughter's daughter, and starts quote-unquote corrupting her a wee bit. She acquires all these kind of indigenous religious icons in her bedroom and stuff, and so the mother and the grandmother start freaking out about that, and there's so much clever kind of socio-political stuff going on, but it's a really unnerving, creepy movie, which it shouldn't be, because the people being haunted are pieces of shit, but It's just the way it's constructed is just so clever, and it's so well cast, and I loved pretty much everything this movie did, and it's a real joy to look. It's really sumptuously made. The cinematography and everything is really nice. It gets great use out of this mansion location, like creeping around the long hallways, and it's really beautiful. One of the best horror movies I've seen in a long time, and it does it without any scares whatsoever. It really is just all atmosphere.
Yeah. That has been on my to-watch list since you talked about it previously in the podcast, and you've just reminded me I do need to see it because it sounds right up my alley.
So there you go. But I'm sure James Wan will remake it at some point and make it much better. He'll add in a lot of CGI wailing monsters at the end and a levitating house. And
the mansion will be really small from the outside. My number 4 is a knockabout comedy in the classic style of British comedies from the late 70s and 80s. A film that made me laugh solidly for the last 10 minutes. I am talking, of course, Craig, about Censor. And if anyone missed that, the knockabout comedy part was a lie.
Do you know what, James? I'm going to suggest we put a pin and talk about that for now because it's going to come back real soon. Yeah, we're going to address all those things you just said.
The brownest movie of 2021. So let's skip over to your number 4, Craig.
My number 4, this one is a wee bit of a cheat because this movie actually came out in 2020, but I didn't see it until this year, and I loved it so much that I thought I cannot not put this on my end of year list. I don't care if it's cheating, it needs to get included. And I mentioned it already on the podcast, but it's an Australian horror movie called Relic.
Ah, right, yeah.
And it is a stunningly well-made movie. And back, remember seconds ago when I said La Llorona is one of the best horror movies I've seen in years? Relic is also up there. And in some ways there's actually some similarities, because this movie also is largely set in a single location. It's set in a single house. And the plot basically is, out in rural Australia, a middle-aged woman and her young daughter, her daughter's in her 20s or so. In fact, you know, the actress who plays the daughter was actually one of the scary models in Nicholas Winding Refn's The Neon Demon.
Oh, okay.
That's when I realised I'd seen her before. She's the one who isn't Abby Lee. She's the other scary model. Yeah, so they both come to visit the mother's mother, the grandmother, if you like. Let's just call her the mother for the sake, so we know what we're talking about. No, let's call it the grandmother. So grandmother, mother, daughter. That's what we'll say. But the grandmother's nowhere to be seen, and apparently nobody's seen her for quite some time. And so the mother and the daughter are kind of getting a bit worried, and it looks like the house is in a state of disrepair. She hasn't really been taking care of it. So they start wandering around the woods looking for the grandmother. They eventually get a search party out to look for her. Nobody can find her. A couple of days pass, and then suddenly the grandmother's back in the house, and quite the thing, just standing there making tea, and they ask her where she's been, and she acts like she's never been away. TLDR, this is mainly a movie about the tragedy of living with someone with dementia. That's really what this movie is about. But it's executed as a horror movie, and it's executed very sensitively as a horror movie, and at the same time it manages to be a fantastic horror movie. Basically, the crux of it is the grandmother has been getting lost in the house, and the house starts to become a reflection of the grandmother's state of mind, essentially. And it's that kind of surreal dreamlike thing where the house seems to begin to change as the movie goes on.
I remember you talking about the house growing new parts.
Right,
Yeah.
and it's one of those things I always love. I love when, you know, it's always one of those really unnerving, surreal horror things when a concrete structure suddenly acquires dimensions inside that do not correspond with the exterior.
Like James Wan knows all about
I don't
that.
mean I was going to say I don't mean the way that James Wan does it in *Malignant*, which is literally you've just put two wrong houses together. But there's a truly terrifying sequence towards the end of this movie, where the daughter goes rummaging around in hidden parts of the house and suddenly finds whole new corridors where there cannot be corridors and whole new rooms where there cannot be rooms. And the way the movie stages it is, that's such a simple concept but makes it utterly spine-chilling. And it's that kind of way where I was like, no, don't go down there. Don't go down there. But at the same time, it's like, I know she's going to go down there and I probably would do the same thing.
I don't know about you, but I've had nightmares where that's happened.
Same.
You've been in
a
familiar place, but you're like, what the fuck is this? Where's this door?
Yeah. Same thing here, and it's so beautifully done. The set design is incredible, and the way they've obviously constructed this set to match the look of the real house is immaculate. You know, there's a part where you start to realise she's not going to get out of here because she turns around and suddenly the way she came looks entirely different. It's like, oh, fucking hell. Yeah, it's really terrifying. The end game of this movie is devastating. That's all I'm going to say. It manages to do what a horror movie should do, which is terrify you, but then it brings you right back into that human level of going, this is utterly, utterly tragic. It's a really powerful movie, really well made, really sensitively made, and I cannot recommend it highly enough. There was no way I could exclude it from my top 10, regardless of being released in 2020.
Well, it was released in Australia in 2020, but because of time differences and how long it takes to travel there,
exactly, aye.
Got here in 2021.
A dingo ate the distribution rights. Australian listeners, apologies. We know you've heard all these shite jokes before.
Do we have Australian listeners?
Yes, we do. I don't think we have many, but we have seen Australia.
Shout out to Australian listeners. I spent a fair bit of time in North Queensland and quite like it. Well done.
Hope you're all enjoying your time on Smoko.
Yeah.
I'm on Smoko! So leave me alone! I'm on Smoko! So leave me alone!
Number 3 for me, Craig, is the slowest film of the last decade. David Lynch says, maybe speed up the plot a little in what is my favourite ridiculous fantasy film that I've seen in a long time.
Oh, yes, yeah.
It's Dev Patel as the world's worst Knight of the Round Table, Sir Gawain in The Green Knight.
More like shite of the Round Table.
I spoke a little bit about this film before. It's a delight. It's an absolute delight. I watched it again and I picked up things I hadn't seen before. If anyone's unfamiliar with it, it's based on a short poem about Sir Gawain, who is, I believe, King Arthur's nephew, so it's about that whole Arthurian legend that Mark Frost would be able to tell you more about if he was with us right now.
Aye.
And essentially it's set at Christmas. During Christmas dinner with King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table, a Green Knight comes in, lays a challenge down to the Knights of the Round Table that any man who hits him may strike him once, but then a year from now they have to go to his chapel 3 days north and he gets to do the same back to them. But this Green Knight is so freakish looking that no one wants to touch him. So Sir Gawain, who's done nothing, he's not a Sir yet, he's just Gawain. He's like, do you know what? Fuck it, I'll do it.
Gawain shite.
So he borrows Excalibur, walks up to the Green Knight and fucking lops his head off because he's like, I'll be a legend. The Green Knight laughs, picks its head up and walks out. And then it cuts to a year later and Sir Gawain has to go and basically be beheaded by the Green Knight. That's the story.
That is stunning.
Classic Arthurian nonsense. The performances in this film are off the chain. Dev Patel is fucking amazing. It's a great choice to have Dev Patel as this sort of lead in a Anglo-Saxon medieval fantasy. Well, it's not even medieval, it's Dark Ages, I guess, fantasy.
Dark Ages, yeah, pretty much.
He exudes just charm and awesomeness while also exuding complete fucking cluelessness. He bumbles his way from scene to scene that a cynic might say were put in to just stretch the runtime of a film based around a short poem. But it's just wonderful. It's just nonsense. It's slow. It's hilarious. The first person he meets beats the shit out of him and steals his horse. So he just has to walk around. He sees some giants wandering around, as you do. Then he meets Alicia Vikander, and it's hard to explain if you've not seen the film, but Alicia Vikander is terrifying and beautiful, and she does sinister monologues like almost no one I've ever seen before. The only thing I'd seen Alicia Vikander in before was that like terrible Tomb Raider movie.
Right,
I didn't rate her in any way, but after seeing her in The Green Knight, I was like, holy shit, she can be fucking sinister as hell. I'll spare spoiling the end if it's in so much as the film has an ending. Highly recommended. Have you seen it, Craig?
I've not, no.
It's daft as all fuck.
Yeah, I've made it sound interesting.
Sean Harris, who plays King Arthur.
Oh, I like Sean Harris.
Sean Harris's portrayal of King Arthur is hilarious because I think he's supposed to be super old, but Sean Harris ain't that old. So they just pap some talcum powder on him and make him speak in a weird way. It's so fucking good.
Sounds like another classic subtle Sean Harris performance.
Yeah. It's on Amazon Prime.
On the Bezos.
It's on the Bezos Prime, so get it smelt, get it watched. absolute delight, start to finish. We're in my top 3 films right now, which are all I would infinitely watch any of these films. So
Yeah.
cannot praise it highly enough.
Yeah, I'm the same with my imminent top 3. I would watch honestly, these 3 could have been interchangeable, but I eventually decided on this order for reasons which I can probably just about intellectualize. But yeah, any of these 3 they're all great. Fuck it. But anyway, this is the sequence I've got them in. My number 3, James. We might have to put a pin in this one also for a minute.
All right.
Got a feeling you might mention this. It's a very easy to digest movie.
All right.
Very accessible. Pretty mainstream. You know, it's the kind of movie you could watch with the whole family. Family entertainment. It's not too challenging. It's perfectly cromulent, you might say. And when I say cromulent, maybe I mean chrome-healing.
Is that a perfectly linear storyline that's easy to follow and explain?
That movie is Titan.
Let's talk about Titan, because my number 2 choice is Titan. So it would be the next film I talk about.
All right, well, where to begin?
I had planned on seeing this film, but I wasn't super hyped about seeing it. I just thought, this sounds interesting. It wasn't until you talked about it, and I was like, okay, I'm watching it, and I think I watched it like 2 nights later, and I messaged you several times during the course of the film.
Yep.
Just head in hands, mouth open, agog, pissing myself laughing.
So for the broad strokes, for those unfamiliar, which is, let's be real about it, it's probably most of you, Titan is directed by Julia Ducournau, who I'd seen her film Raw a few years ago, which is an amazing film. A kind of body horror film that is also like a kind of art house satirical drama about bourgeois culture, and also an esoteric exploration of strange things going on at a veterinary college. It's a truly unique movie, and ever since I saw that, I was like, okay, I want to see anything else she does. So when I heard this movie was on the way, I was like, okay, that's one to get excited about. It won the Palme d'Or this year. To about at least 50% outrage, continuing that long tradition upheld by David Lynch with Wild at Heart in 1990. Okay, let's... How do we sum up the plot of Titan?
I don't know, I think I mentioned beforehand, but the GFT showed this and tweeted about like 20 or 30 people walked out of the movie.
Yeah, that's
They
fabulous.
tweeted it just as you should come see this. People fucking just bail on this movie. And you can see why, because if you're of a certain disposition, or if you're squeamish in a certain way, or if you maybe think, I'll go and see this year's Palme d'Or winner, you're maybe not prepared for what is going to unfold on the screen before you.
This is not an easy movie in a lot of ways. Not only does it show you a lot of confrontational things, but also does not operate under the usual rules of a movie in any way. Broad strokes, I remember I described it on a previous episode just by describing the first 20 to 25 minutes. In the first 20 to 25 minutes, we're introduced to a young child who's in a car accident and subsequently has to undergo extreme cranial surgery, having a titanium plate around her head, and then has got extreme scarring afterwards. And then after having come out of that, far from being perturbed by motor cars, she instead seems to have developed some kind of fetish for motor cars.
Yep.
As you would.
There's a few little elements of David Cronenberg's Crash in here. Sorry, Ballard's Crash, whatever you want to say.
Yeah, well, either works. And so fast forward, said character, now fully grown, is now one of those dancers at car shows who dance lasciviously on top of cars.
Yep. Although this is unlike, I think, when you mentioned that, I didn't visualise exactly what the car show looked like.
How could you?
I don't think I've ever seen that in real life.
Julia Ducournau has created a genre of car show that I don't think exists in real life.
Essentially a giant fetish strip show, only instead of dancing on a pole, people dance on what look like muscle cars. Yeah.
Yes. And so Alexia, our heroine, is very enthusiastic about her lascivious dancing with motor cars. And it really is not about the spectators. Next thing we learn about Alexia, she's also a serial killer. Apparently her dispatch method of choice is a needle through the ear. So that's her signature. And it turns out she's responsible for a whole lot of deaths. So TLDR, it gets to the point where she realises the cops are closing in on her. She's going to have to escape somehow.
I don't want to spoil too much, but could we take a moment here to discuss the scene which results in an identikit of her being given to the police because someone survives her onslaught?
Oh shit, yes.
That house massacre.
Yeah. I mean, the way that's played, there's so much awkwardness. Like, it's so difficult for each of those kills to actually be completed. And it's like, there's a kind of a comedy going on there. Like,
potential serial killers out there, if you're gonna kill someone, make sure that they're not in a 4-person house share with flatmates who are concerned about noise.
And there's actually a line where she says, "How many of you are there?" And it's deliberately played for grim laughs. If Mark Kermode struggled with the tone of Riders of Justice, one wonders how he tackled this. I've not seen him comment on this movie. But yeah, that happens. And as she decides her method of escaping the Dragonet is to disguise herself as a missing child and then go and live with said missing child's father. Yep. This is what happens in this movie, guys.
Yep. We're 25 minutes in at this point.
Yeah. It's not, and this is a 2-hour movie. And said missing child's father is the fire chief of a town, and clearly got mental struggles of his own. And there then follows for the longest swathe of this movie is like a very bleak, slightly surreal, almost kitchen sink drama played out by these extreme freakish characters.
Do you know something though, Craig? That entire middle section just flew by for me. It did not feel like a 2-hour film. I was so engrossed.
Yeah, no, same. I was totally into
the oddities of like the firehouse mosh pit.
And all the kind of dreamlike extinguishing sequences, like, and the training sequences, all that stuff. There's a real dreamlike quality, all that stuff. This is a unique movie, I think we can say. It's a very difficult movie to recommend to just about anyone, however. I fucking loved it. I think Julia Ducournau is either someone who is so embroiled in their own very specific set of metaphors that it's so difficult to parse that you end up just laughing at it or finding some sort of jolly in it because it just makes you so uncomfortable to watch that you're never going to quite realise or come to know what it is she means by certain scenes. Or she is simply European cinema's biggest fucking troll. Yep. And honestly, either way, she's a genius and I love her.
She's great. 2 episodes ago, you linked an interview with Julia Ducournau in the episode description of our episode, and I watched some of it. I get the impression there's points during the interview where she does look like she's trying to conceal just buckling with laughter. Yeah. But the way she presents it, though, also kind of makes sense in her metaphor about the idea of it being a story of unconditional love.
Yes, yeah, she seems very sincere about that. So that's what makes me think. That's what makes me think she is sincere about. I mean, there's no way you can say what she does in that interview and not be sincere about that. But there is still an element where I'm like, but really though, every part of this movie, are you sure?
It's the unconditional love between woman and car, or is it the unconditional love between woman, son, woman, and father?
That's a point. Actually, we missed one of the key parts of that first 20 minutes. Is that she literally has sex with
a car.
Is it a Cadillac?
I think it's a Cadillac with like flames and
with a flame motif.
Yeah. It's a pure muscle car. It's the one she's dancing on at the show.
Yes, aye. And thereafter, she is revealed to be pregnant to said car.
Which results in some of the most horrible fucking body prosthetic scenes I've seen.
Extreme body horror. And, and that does come to a conclusion towards the end of the movie. That's all we're going to say about that. If all of this, in any way, shape or form, sounds like something you would enjoy watching,
get in.
Then I can only say you will love this movie, probably. If, like, probably 90% of you are listening to this thinking that sounds like utter abject fucking nonsense,
you might still
maybe
like
give it a miss.
Honestly.
But you never know until you try.
It's beautifully shot, though. It looks incredible.
Oh, it's good. The cinematography is impeccable. The production design is amazing. The choices of locations, she gets great use out of each of those locations. I mean, that's even if you doubt... If you're someone who watches this and you come away really doubting Julia Ducournau's intentions as a filmmaker, there's no doubting her talent as a filmmaker. She really knows how to put shit together. She really knows how to shoot things. She also knows how to direct actors. These actors give great performances. Actually, we should mention the lead actress, Agathe Roussel. This is the first time she's ever acted.
For real? Jesus,
for
she
real.
Is great.
Julia Ducournau saw her on Instagram, really liked her look, and said, I really want to photograph your face. Apparently, is what she said.
But while we're at it, could we smash it off a sink and shave your head?
Well, I think this happened before she was planning to tan, and then along the way she's like, "Oh, of course, she has to be Alexa." So that's how that happened. But I saw her explain this in another interview. She said she had one of those faces that I knew, depending on where I placed my camera, she would look completely different. It would look like different people. And she's right. She has one of those faces where the planes are quite unusual. She does have quite a strange look. And Ducournau's camera gets great mileage out of that. Vincent Landon, who plays the fire chief, he's like a long-established actor in France, and he plays a lot of very serious, very sober roles. He's like one of France's most well-respected actors, and Julia Ducournau apparently only had him in mind for this role. And you have to think to yourself, it takes a real oddball mind to look at someone who's had that kind of career, say, I want to take that guy and put him in the weirdest fucking situation possible. Also, I want him to get thoroughly jacked. And she told him it's probably going to take you about a year and a half to have the kind of physique that you're going to need for this role. I'm mainly stunned that he said yes.
That's insane.
Because the dude is ripped.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, he's like well into his 60s. He is fucking ripped.
Yeah, there's that scene where you see him doing the pull-ups and stuff where you're like, fucking hell, man.
Yeah.
I couldn't do one of those.
Yeah, it's insane. But, I mean, there's so much going on in this movie in terms of metaphors that are very complex. And, yes, you're always receiving it with that possible degree of skepticism of whether or not Ducournau is taking the piss. But there's definitely very deep subjects going on. I take her at her word when she says that. One of the things I did find quite disarming in that same interview you mentioned is she does say herself that at the beginning, Alexia is a protagonist who's impossible to relate to. She herself says that. And it's like, okay, wow, so you deliberately chose to make a movie about someone even you cannot relate to. She's quite clear about that. In her mind, this is somehow about humanising that person. What else is cinema for if it's not for showing us things we've never seen? And not only does Ducournau do that visually, she also does it in terms of characterization, because this is a journey towards humanization like we've never seen. And it's really hard to grasp because we've had so many cliched narratives fed to us about what humanization is. To see it done in an entirely different way seems like it's a film from an alien planet almost. Once you tune into what she's doing, fair enough, you might have to look up interviews with her, but once you go back and look at that movie again, it's like, okay, all right, it will linger. And what else is cinema for? Yeah. Final note on this, I did read another interview whether it was a truncated version of it appeared in The Guardian. I saw somebody mention online that it was a fuller version of it that's really funny, and I looked it up, and the interviewer says, so this scene with the car, we have what appears to be a sex scene, and Ducournau just stops her and says, it doesn't appear to be a sex scene. It is a sex scene. Okay, but what I mean is, she appears to actually have sex with the car. Ducournau said, she has sex with the car. Did you see it? And the interviewer says, yeah, I saw it. And Ducournau says, then it happened.
They started fucking, it was disgusting.
Did you see it? Then it happened.
Julia Ducournau has the same approach as I had to the first time I watched Twin Peaks The Return and took everything literally. We should get her on for the second half of our Twin Peaks The Return coverage.
That would be amazing. Although I think I would turn to jelly in her presence, honestly. Julia, if you're listening, the door's open. If you want to see me turn into a human blancmange.
Could be your next film. So that was your number 3. That was my number 2. Craig, what is your number 2 choice?
My number 2 choice is a film from the Ivory Coast, directed by Philippe Lacote, called Night of the Kings. And I think I did mention this in the podcast some episodes back. But Night of the Kings is a kind of magical realist drama set entirely in a prison complex in the Ivory Coast, which, interestingly, is actually based on a real-life prison. But this is sort of set in an alternate present / near future where the inmates have taken over the prison. There's like next to no actual prison industry presence in the building anymore. And so it's like a sort of a kind of self-regulating organism. And it begins with a whole bunch of new convicts arrive, and the new convicts are all given roles, and it's like this weird sort of esoteric tribal thing now taking place inside this prison where they've constructed their own society, basically. And one of the main character, he gets assigned the role as the storyteller, and so he has to tell stories of things he's experienced in the outside world, but they have to be mythologized, because that's the only way that this prison basically operates on the realm of mythology. Everything has to be kind of hyper real, and everything is given metaphorical meaning. And as he's given his stories, we start to see dramatizations of those stories. They often involve kind of magical elements and stuff, and so there's like these two realms that this film is taking place in. There's the gritty realism of the prison, albeit I say gritty realism, it's also with that very weird aspect of it being a prison run by the prisoners. And then there's this kind of magical world that he's describing. But the magical world he's describing is really intriguing because it's very much a mixture of the real world in the present day mixed with the real world of times past. And it's sort of this kind of nebulous time zone where like the Middle Ages merge with the 21st century, and there's a lot of really interesting stuff going on there. And it does do some commentary on kind of post-colonial African politics. But what I wasn't prepared for, and you know how much I love magical realism,
Yep.
I wasn't prepared for how magical realist this movie is. It brought me such joy to see this kind of stuff on the screen. And this is a short movie, it's only 90 minutes long, but it packs so much in those 90 minutes. And the supporting cast, everybody is so great, and every character is so distinctive. There's also great choreography involved when the storyteller is telling his stories. There's like a group of 3 and 4 other prisoners who do like kind of interpretive dance of his story.
Oh shit!
Like just improvised. Yeah. It's incredible. It's really spellbinding to watch. And there's this idea all the way through the movie that being cast as storyteller is actually a poison chalice, because once you finish telling your stories, you're sacrificed.
Oh.
And he learns this about halfway through, and so he has to just keep saying, no, there's another part of the story, It's an incredible film. It's such a well realized, unique film. I don't remember the last time I saw anything that I could compare this to, really. It's certainly got elements of other things I can compare it to, but actually felt like a Latin American movie despite being from the Ivory Coast, but it just had that kind of vibe about it, that sort of blend of realism and mysticism.
It sounds brilliant. That's also on my watch list.
Yeah, so big recommend.
That brings me to my number 1 movie, Craig. My number 1 choice, my favourite film of the year 2021, is a fun little kids movie by the name of PG Psycho Gorman.
So full disclosure, this is what I mentioned earlier when I said I had an honourable mention I was going to put in, but I put a pin in it because I had a feeling you were going to put it in, and here you have, put it at your number 1 movie.
I cannot remember the last time I watched a film that I enjoyed as much as this film. Like, this is another one of those things that I feel like it was designed specifically for me. It's got hilarious practical effects, big weird alien outfits. It's...
straight out of Power Rangers.
It really is, yeah. It's absurd. It's hilarious.
Oh, it's so absurd. And it's so hilarious. Way funnier than it has any fucking right to be. I mean, there's part of me now wishing I put it in my top 10, but it doesn't matter. We're getting to talk about it anyway. But I thoroughly enjoyed this movie also. I would give this movie 5 stars. I really loved it.
Yep.
And it was a movie I went into thinking it would probably provide me a modicum of amusement. And I remember actually halfway through this film having to stop it because my sides were a fucking agony. I was like, this is amazing.
It's a perfect, not even like a pastiche, almost like an homage to like the sort of the 80s or early 90s children's movie where the idea was some sort of alien presence. In this case, the title PG Psycho Gorman is a direct sort of knockoff of E.T. the Extraterrestrial. But there was that whole thing of like the Explorers and those kind of movies where children would meet an alien presence and they would bond and wacky hijinks would ensue. The only difference in this case being that the alien presence is the most evil creature in the universe that wants to destroy all life.
And second of all, the child is probably the most evil child on Earth.
I can't even explain. Her performance is incredible. She is the best child actor I've seen in years.
I think, as I said to you before, Was that an uncommonly great performance by a child actor, or did they literally just find an insane child?
Yeah, I don't know. She has one other IMDb credit, and it's like an uncredited appearance in a Clive Barker TV show. So,
oh well, of course, right at home there she'd be.
Yeah, she either has a bright future or a bleak as fuck future, but she shines in this. She's a horrible little bastard.
She's absolutely unhinged. Her performance is unhinged, but she's fantastic, and she's legitimately funny.
Yeah. She beats her brother in a game that they've invented called Crazy Ball, and the prize is she gets to bury him.
Right, and it's the recurring joke about the rules of Crazy Ball being far too complex for anybody to comprehend. Holy shit, this movie was nuts.
The dad is fucking brilliant.
Oh, the schlubby dad.
Yeah. It's hard to explain how funny he is.
It's weird because it's also a really bleak movie because none of the human characters are particularly likeable. Like the parents are kind of shite, and you can tell they sort of hate each other. And it's like, wow, this is such a bleak view of humanity.
The titular Psycho Gorman turns a boy that the girl has a crush on into a giant brain monster, and no one really notices.
Ah, Jesus.
There's that brilliant bit when the cops show up.
Oh, Jesus Christ.
He kills one, it sort of melts another and turns him into a mind-controlled mutant slave. I love the bit they're just walking through the forest. The cop's like, oh, it's like guns going off and shit.
It's a thoroughly deranged movie, and the production design on it glorifies the cheapness
really
of its
does.
own budget in all the right ways. And for a movie that was made in the 21st century, it really does look and feel like it was made in 1991.
It does. You could totally see going into like the Blockbuster or your local video store, like your off-brand one, and just looking at the shelves to see what film to get and seeing it on one of the higher up shelves and going, oh, that looks fucking great, I'm going to get that. Even though it's like an 18 and I'm like, 8, I'm going to rent it. It gave me so much joy. Not only best film of the year, but best film I've seen in a long time. Loved it to bits.
I remember another thing, for you Twin Peaks fans out there, I remember I joked to you, kind of cool how they got Wyndham Earl to be the narrator. And then it turned out it actually is Kenneth Welsh is the narrator, and I was like, holy shit. And he also plays one of the aliens at the table.
Oh, and he's one of like the council that are trying to find Psycho Gorman.
And it looks like, to be fair, the costuming department all came from whatever costume shop it was that Wyndham Earl got his disguising.
Oh, Wilbur. But absolutely worthwhile. Please check it out. I think it's on Shudder. We've been giving Shudder some traffic, but it's on Shudder. Go check it out.
Yeah, it's a treat, a delight, a madcap fucking delight. And much like, in fact, I feel like the last few films we've mentioned, these are films unlike any other movie you're going to see anytime soon.
I think it says a lot about us that these are our top movies.
Alright, so that brings me to my number one. And I guess it's been spoiled for you, because I did say put a pin in this earlier. My number one movie of the year is Censor.
What a film.
Censor, for people who don't know, is a British film, British horror film, set in the 80s, during the video nasty era, when an extreme brand of reactionary sentiment reigned, and there was a lot of panic about the availability of home video and who could view certain kinds of content in the privacy of their own home. And so if you don't know this, if you live outside the UK, in the 80s, a lot of films got banned. They got added to what was called the video nasty list. Yep. And most of them were horror movies or exploitation movies.
The tabloids had field days with this kind of stuff.
They did. The right-wing press were absolutely wanking themselves into a frenzy. Yep. And Censor is set in that world, and it deals specifically with a young woman who works as a censor for what was called then the British Board of Censorship. It's now called the British Board of Film Classification. It's not quite the reactionary force now that it was back then, I think that's fair to say. But back in the 80s, it was a bit of a strange phenomenon. Censoring things was what they were about, rather than giving things a green light. Whereas British Board of Film Certification lets you know that they're just there to consider what certificates films should have. Back when it was called the British Board of Film Censorship, that was their mission: to cut things to shreds or just shove them out of sight. And so the lead character in this movie is one of those censors who takes her job very, very seriously. And it transpires in the first act of the movie, we do get to know that she also has a bit of a trauma in her past that's a bit oblique at first. But the movie lets us join the dots enough to think maybe this was somehow the impetus for doing her job. Because she does seem to be very much under the impression that people watching violent content might encourage people to commit real life violence, which is a ridiculous belief, but apparently it is a belief that people had.
It was mainstream, even extended into the 90s, because I remember, going off the rails a little here, but I remember in first or second year in our English class, we had a debate, like a teacher scheduled debate about do films and media cause violence, and it was surprising the number of people even at that age who were like, yeah, it was around the time like the Child's Play thing being banned.
I was going to say the Bulger murder.
Incident, yeah. And there were so many people who were like, yeah, those films should be banned, people can watch that, and if they're young they'll get the idea. And I was on the other end of the spectrum even then. I was just like, get to fuck. It's like, no way I can watch anything like that. My point was, I was like, I watched Texas Chainsaw Massacre when I was 5. I never killed anyone with a chainsaw. I was more concerned. I was more concerned with my Transformers the movie comic adaptation that I was reading at the time while watching Texas Chainsaw Massacre. I mean, I don't care Leatherface is in a screen. Optimus Prime just died. Spoiler for Transformers the movie.
Yep.
But sorry, carry on.
Yeah, and the crux of it is, in her line of work, she comes across a movie that seems in its content to refer very specifically to an experience that she had as a child that seems to be tied up with this trauma. And we also learn that her younger sister went missing in childhood. These are all things we learn quite near the start. This movie is very economical, actually. It parcels out this information really quickly, but in a very natural way. It's one of the things I really liked about it instantly.
Yeah.
So I won't spoil any more plot-wise from there, except to say this is the impetus for a delirious journey down either, and the viewer can pick, either complete madness on the part of the protagonist, a complete delusion, or that there is legitimately some kind of conspiracy. Or, in fact, there could even be a middle ground, actually, I would argue, that you could pick and mix.
She spirals into the conspiracy that exists while also going slightly wackadoodle. I think we've talked about this before, but the last 10 minutes of that movie are 10 of the most intense minutes of any film I've ever seen. And I was laughing solidly through it, but mostly it wasn't, oh, this is funny laugh. Mostly it was, you know, when you're so shocked that your only response is to laugh.
Yeah, it's like when people laugh at Grace Zabriskie crying in the pilot of Twin Peaks.
Yeah, it's so extreme. The production design in that movie, though,
it's incredible.
We have to talk about that.
This is a low-budget movie as well, and it does such a great job. I remember saying this before, but as a kid, as somebody who grew up as a kid in the 80s, I remember quite vividly what the 80s looked like in this country, and holy shit if this movie does not replicate exactly how I remember the 80s looking.
Yeah, because most stuff nowadays that harkens back to the 80s, most nostalgia-filled 80s trips, even stuff based around UK 80s, tends to be the idea that everyone's dressed like they're in Duran Duran or Bucks Fizz, or everyone's wearing bright neon day-glow, big shoulder pads, everything's like super colourful and garish,
right,
but it wasn't like that. Everything was brown.
There was a lot of earth tones going on in the UK in the 80s, and a lot of pale blue, and
everyone smoked.
Yeah, and we cannot think of the 80s in this country without thinking of the legacy of Thatcherism, and you know, just how difficult things were politically, and just how much class warfare was a very real, tangible thing. And somehow this movie manages to convey all of that stuff without ever really going into it. It just does just enough to represent those things on the screen in such a natural way that it entirely works. The reasons why this movie is my number one movie, albeit I've said my last few are maybe interchangeable, but if I can justify myself with this, I think this is going to sound like a bold statement. I think this is a perfect movie. I don't think this movie has any flaws, and it does everything I want a movie to do. And what I mean by that is the filmmaker, the director, the great Prano Bailey Bond, she does a great job on this. I'm really excited to see whatever she does next.
Is this her first film?
This is her first feature.
Fucking hell, man. Save some talent for the rest of us, Prano.
Right, but it's a movie which really the filmmaker really sets out a very clear set of intentions, and she achieves every single one of them, and she makes them all work together, even when sometimes in the hands of a lesser director, they wouldn't have worked quite as well. Because it can be quite a clunky, clumsy thing to take what is a very obvious metaphor. The fact that the main character, Enid, her name is, played brilliantly by Niamh Algar, is the fact that she is a censor, literally a censor. And Prano Bailey Bond wants to nudge us and say, but maybe she's also a censor of her own thoughts, kind of thing. And it's like, okay, I mean, that, and it, you know what I mean? In the hands of a lesser writer or a lesser director, that'd be like, all right, we get it, you know what I mean? And this movie entirely works. I didn't once ever, you know, kind of balk at the movie doing any of that stuff. It all felt very natural and very seamless. And a cynic would say the only reason this movie is set in the 80s is because this filmmaker went out of their way to make a very clumsy metaphor about people censoring themselves. To which I say they actually did a great job of creating a movie about the 80s in the process. So actually it wins on both counts. Yeah. I think as a character study as well, I think Niamh Algar does such great work in her performance. There's some really great choices she makes. And obviously, you know, the production design, the costume design has its own thing as well. They always make her look very buttoned up and all that kind of stuff. And it's only as the movie goes on, she starts to look slightly a bit more dishevelled. And her body language throughout this movie is so good. Like, she's always very tight within herself, like keeping her limbs tight to her torso, kind of like keeping her arms folded and stuff like that. I mean, in some ways it's maybe, you could say, filmmaking 101, but it's a filmmaking 101 that I don't see done as well as this very often. And as a horror movie, it works impeccably well because, first of all, it's a psychological drama, which is how you create any good horror movie. There has to be some element of, I mean, other than slasher movies, which are a whole different form of entertainment. But for a genuinely disturbing horror movie, there has to be that psychological drama element. We have to be invested in the protagonist's own idea of themselves to some extent. And we get that within the first 10 minutes in this movie. You're immediately enveloped in this character's mind. And there's such great... It's easy to be cynical about scare moments or jump moments. And this movie has a few, but they're used really well. I'm thinking particularly when we get those sort of hallucinatory / dream moments where Enid is remembering half remembering what happened to her sister, and then we get that brief shot of her mother shouting at her.
Yeah.
Which for me is one of the most chilling moments in the whole movie. And it's like, you can look at that and say, oh, did that happen? Or is this like self-recrimination on Enid's part, or a combination of both? And I love the fact that we, even after watching the whole movie, we still have these questions. You know, you can tick all of the above, or some of the above, and the movie still works. I think when you put all that together, and the fact that the end game that you were talking about, which I remember describing it to you semi-jokingly as Garth Marenghi's Inland Empire.
Yeah, but it totally is an accurate description. Which sounds like you're mocking it, but it's not. It's a perfect...
Yeah, no, I'm not I mean it 100% as a compliment, because it was delirious, but also deeply chilling. And I will say this about the last 10 minutes, or the last few minutes of this movie. There is a sequence where there's a very simple filmmaking trick that Prano Bailey Bond uses that you see quite often, but you don't see it used as powerfully as this. And it's when she inserts a suggestion of something else happening in a scene where she's showing you what is supposed to be reality, but there's these little glitches that she puts in, and it's like, oh no, that's what's happening, kind of thing. Each of those is utterly terrifying, and I think it happens only a total of 3 times. And it's the perfect amount. It's not too little and it's not too many. And there's like I'll try not to spoil anything here, but the denouement in this movie is there is what is ostensibly a kind of happy moment, a kind of moment of relief. But because it's spliced in with those really disturbing, jarring images showing you something else, that's all I'll say about it. It's deeply fucking chilling. And again, it's the kind of thing we were talking about when we were talking about David Lynch's approach to episode 8 of The Return, where everything he does is just old school filmmaking techniques, and gets absolutely revolutionary mileage out of those techniques. Prano Bailey Bond does a very similar thing here. And I think what's especially delicious about it, though, is because she's dealing with the era in which videotape was the prevailing medium.
Yeah, it looks
Having
like
those
video cuts.
VHS style glitches, yeah, it's incredible. And it also makes me think of Videodrome a wee bit, David Cronenberg's Videodrome, which I feel is also a deliberate kind of reference there as well. There's so much going on in this movie. It's so layered. For a 90-minute movie that's very compact, very concise, it does all its different stylistic things perfectly. It does all its thematic things perfectly. It gets great performances out the cast. It looks beautiful.
It invites
it's a
repeat
perfect
viewings
movie.
because it's so short as well.
God,
It's
yeah.
like,
Yeah.
it's absolutely worth seeing more than once. If you've already watched it, watch it again. If you've not seen it, just watch it. It's incredible.
Jay Bowman again, if you're listening. This was another thing when they were talking about. Jay said another thing that I know I said, which was he said, "I feel like this was a movie made for me." Jay, when are you coming around for drinks, dude?
Let's get Jay on. Let's get a Red Letter Media fSobriety crossover.
So yeah, that is my film of the year, probably. Those are my top 3 films of the year.
Fantastic. And I think that, Craig,
It's been another thrilling episode of fCinebriety.
a toodle pip.
Toodle pip.